Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from lastcar.info, and welcome to Behind the Wall, not Behind the Wheel. That's another show. We are back tonight after the conclusion of the Daytona 500, where Ricky Stenhouse Jr., pending post-race inspection, has just scored his first Daytona 500 victory, but not without some controversy and some commercials. And we got plenty about that to talk about on the show tonight. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. We're going to be talking about the Cup Series action throughout this past week, as well as the dual races, the Truck Series races, and the Xfinity race here. So we'll go ahead and jump into all that action here. But I guess right off the bat, we'll have to start with the 500 coverage itself. Again, it was interesting going into this, watching the 500, and the fact that I usually kind of skip the pre-race show because I don't want to see like a whole lot of, stuff in between. I usually don't watch the pre-race shows for most races, including this one. So I'm glad that people like Bob Pockrass out there are pretty good about posting the actual start time and then just jumping in and starting the race at that point here. Sounds like there was some good stuff in the pre-race show, though, so I do intend to rewatch that later tonight and kind of catch what was happening. I understood there was a more professional or at least a more detailed starting grid during the beginning of that, and I'd very much enjoy checking that out. But in the meantime, I can't really comment on anything that happened before about the command to start engines here, but there's definitely plenty to talk about from that point here. After the race started, though, of course, the several commercial breaks, I will say I didn't entirely notice the commercials for like the first maybe 50 laps or so, thereabouts. It didn't really bother me that much, but I did notice that it felt like a very fragmented 500, which was too bad because we had a lot of long green flag runs in this race. It seemed like we had a lot of different leaders. It seemed like the pack was more compact as well. In tracking the last place battle in this one, which I'm so used to drivers falling off at the back of the field at the very beginning of the race and getting lapped during the first 25 laps or so, that was not the case this time around. Had a very close pack, and I really would have liked to see a lot more of that, but that was around the time that the commercials started to kind of be noticed by me, and I know a lot of everybody else sounds like that was kind of a bigger concern about this from the same time too. So kind of a lot to unpack here. I guess we could start things chronologically through here. So far, again, in keeping with our last car coverage here on the website, the last place finisher of today's race was Ty Dillon. Again, pending post-race inspection, unless anybody's disqualified or NASCAR manages to piece a car back together from those last couple of wrecks and disqualify them, I don't know. But we're going to find out, I guess, either sometime in this show or probably later tonight, given the fact that technical inspection takes a while. But Ty Dillon, the first driver since Bob Schacht in 1992 to finish last in one of his dual races, or the dual race he was in, and the 500 in the same year. Schacht actually did it on the same lap of both races, dropping out with engine problems after 7 laps. In the dual race this past week, Ty Dillon wasn't really a factor in last place of that race until he had a last-minute pit stop where a wheel got away. He just got back on track by the time the checkered flag dropped, but since there was really no attrition in that first race of the duels on Thursday, that handed him the last place finish, and I believe 35th on the grid for the main event. In this one here, because the pack was so compact, because the tail end of the field didn't fall apart until about 25, 26 laps into this race, really the last place spot was really contested, but really because it was just cars that just couldn't go anywhere. Even Kyle Busch, who I expected in the opening laps of this to mount a massive charge and kind of bulldoze through the field like Ken Schrader did in 1990 when he won the pole and had to go to the back of the field after a wreck in his duel. That did not come to pass, at least not at the beginning. And of course, he ended up still being a factor. Busch did in the end of this race. But at that point, you still had a decent bit of competition there at the back of the pack there, and that was ultimately broken up when the 77 car started trailing smoke. Apparently thought it was an issue with the plug wire, but it turned out to be, they declared it terminal pretty quickly. He was only about 4 laps down in the garage area when they pulled the plug on the number 77 entry there, but that certainly changed the complexion of that, and ended up being a very quick out for the last place finishers. Really, all three races in terms of the Truck, Xfinity, and Cups main events here had last place settled very quickly, which made things a little bit easier on one end, but also a little bit more challenging in other respects here. Also, this past weekend, did the starting grid videos for the Truck, Xfinity, and Cup races. Big thanks to those of you guys for checking those out. That was something that kind of came together a little bit later this past winter, but with the start of NASCAR's 75th anniversary season, it's definitely something that I wanted to kind of do to start the season. Those of you in the patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock, voted for the Xfinity Series starting grid, so I definitely wanted to make sure to get that one in. And then I added the Truck Series one as a bit of a bonus there to include that at the same time. So big thanks again to those of you in the Patreon for your support on that, and thanks to those of you on the YouTube channel here for checking those out. But again, let's go back, not to overlook the man of the hour again here, which is, of course, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. In this race last year. Very well could have pulled off the victory. Came very close to pulling it off. He had the Irish Spring car out there, had the lead with, I think, 7 or 8 laps to go. Got in a ridiculous wreck off of turn 4, immediately eliminated him, which was too bad because they did a nice profile where they talked with Brad Daugherty and the crew, and they were all excited, as anybody would be. And then things changed very quickly on that end. Today, very much opposite day here. Seemed like it was going to be Kyle Busch's day. I had picked him as my fantasy pick for this one, even before the qualifying on Wednesday. I really felt that, and I wanted to kind of stand by this statement when this driver change happened, this monumental one that really guided a lot of silly season last year, that I felt that Kyle Busch went to Childress intending to win his first Daytona 500, and by golly, he seemed to come closer in this race than he ever had with any of his runs with Gibbs. Yeah, sometimes he did have, I believe, a couple of runner-up finishes in those. But this one, he seemed to actually go up there and actually take it, and actually trying to take the lead and have a good car out there. I know the picture has gone viral of the backup car that he was driving being one of Austin Dillon's, so you have the number 3 underneath the number 8. I know there was a lot of speculation that when he went to Childress that he was going to take over the 3, and maybe Dillon going over to the 8 vacated by Tyler Reddick, or if something different was going to happen in that sense. It seemed like things were lining up, and I sensed after that ridiculous wreck in Thursday's duel, and again, completely accidental on Daniel Suarez's case, the contact from him sending him into the backstretch wall, he seemed very motivated. He didn't seem, I made comparisons to Mark Martin in 2005, and there's a very famous clip where during his duel and what was going to be his retirement season, ultimately didn't turn out to be the case. Things changed along the way, but he and Rusty Wallace were going to retire in 2005. Both of them got involved in the same wreck that was started between Jimmy Johnson and Kevin Harvick battling for the lead in their duel, and they got piled into this wreck on the back straightaway, and it just totaled both of their cars. And Mark Martin was interviewed by Dr. Dick Berggren, and said, look, I can't win the 500 of the backup car. That car, the car that was all wrecked in the garage, that one could win. And ultimately, they pieced the car back together, and with Wallace's help, Wallace had to go to a backup car. Both of them actually had a shot at actually going for the lead. So it was cool to be kind of reminded of that in this sense here. And although in this case here, Kyle Busch did actually have to go to a backup car. They couldn't piece the thing back together, and ended up being very much in the same situation as Matt Kenseth was during his 2 wins, or Davey Allison was in 1992. Get in a backup car and try to pull off the victory here. And even in the final stages of this, when it got down to inside the final 10 laps, it really felt like he was going to be able to hang on. If it stayed single file with him and Austin Dillon up there, I think Dillon, I'm not sure. I'm sure Dillon would try very hard to win his second Daytona 500 and get around him there. But I think he probably would have helped Kyle at least till the last lap. I think it's so hard to speculate about that because things turned out so radically different in the final stages of this. But I think he was in probably the best shot he's ever had since really 2009, when he was very good in that rain-shortened race before he got in the big one. Kyle Busch was. I thought he had a very fine showing going, and it just didn't turn out there for him, which is too bad. I thought that would turn out. But I think between this and the performance that he and Dillon had in the clash, I'm going to be very interested to see how they carry this into Fontana and do a downforce track into something that's going to be a little bit more typical to most of the schedule. If they can carry this momentum to different kinds of tracks this way, it's already impressive that they've been able to make this jump from, the Clash being so tiny and the 2.5 mile super speedway today in Daytona. I think Childress is off to a very good start. I'm sure they're disappointed. Both their cars wrecked in the race itself. They certainly can't afford to tear up more equipment. But I think they're off to a very good start in spite of the results. And I think that they should feel very good about that. And we'll see. That's going to be interesting in these next couple of weeks here. So looking at the race results here, Kyle Busch, after that incident, ends up dropping back into the 19th spot at the finish. His teammate Austin Dillon, involved in one of the other wrecks there towards the end, he drops all the way to 33rd because attrition was actually fairly low during the first 3 quarters of this race. Felt a little bit closer to like 2016 or one of those other 500s where you had a close finish and a lot of people running at the end. It would have been great if it turned out that way. Unfortunately, Suarez ended up playing a role in that again by spinning out in the tri-oval and getting stuck in the grass, and that really kind of flipped the whole story kind of on its lid at that point. But regardless, low attrition in the early stages here, despite a couple of very hard hits early on. Tyler Reddick's accident in turns 3 and 4, collecting Chase Elliott and Eric Jones. Then later on, the other incident that got Ryan Preece involved, and then bringing up during the broadcast there that a lot of Stewart-Haas equipment was tore up in that same one. But it was good that it wasn't so much of the field depleted, at least at that point, that you could still have a pretty decent finish with a number of cars actually competing for it. There were some challengers that were eliminated in a lot of those. Certainly talk about, drivers like Kevin Harvick, who got some damage, still managed to finish the race a little bit further on there, but wasn't really a contender for the lead. Chase Elliott, very much the same way, ended up going behind the wall pretty quickly after the severity of the damage in his contact with Eric Jones was discovered. All kinds of other scenarios there. But at least like towards the end, if you look at the race results, you're kind of looking at the unofficial results at this point. A large part of the field finished pretty close to, if not more than the distance. In fact, the top 34 finishers, including several that were eliminated at the very end of the race, completed more than the actual scheduled 200 laps. William Byron in 34th, that was eliminated in the Austin Dillon accident, completed 202 laps. So, I think in terms of a 500, that's kind of more or less what you want. I mean, probably not what, the top drivers in the field want. They probably want as many people wiped out so they don't have to beat as many people out there at the finish. But I think as a fan or as, somebody that's following the sport, you probably want to have a lot of, a race that's competitive enough to kind of have it play out that way. Brad Keselowski had another fine showing in this. Looked like he was really going to pull it off. He and Buescher were locked together, very good as teammates during the latter stages of this race, especially as it kind of transitioned from day to night. I think that was a good, good showing from them. Unfortunately, Keselowski's winless streak in the 500 does continue in this, as it does with Martin Truex, who went through not one but 2 accidents before he was dropped further back in the lineup. However, despite the damage suffered in those, I believe he still had a somewhat decent finish, a 16th place finish on the lead lap, which is very remarkable given how fragile the toe links on these cars are and how narrow the tolerance is when something goes sideways there with one of these teams. But despite running it on the 19th, this being his 19th try at it, car 19 does not pull off the victory. Much like, again, I thought Kyle Busch's thing lined up more with him, this being his 18th attempt, the first race since 1991 without the 18 in the field. I thought everything was going 18. I don't know what everybody was talking 19 for, but Truex does have the longest streak of the active drivers, full-time drivers that haven't won the 500. So that's certainly worthy of mention there as well. Also, at the same time, Jimmy Johnson involved in one of those late race accidents there, finishes in the 31st spot. From here, really got to look at some other guys that actually came out the other side of this in pretty good shape. I'm already seeing some comments about this. Definitely got to talk about it. Unofficially, Riley Herbst, in his first ever Cup Series start, driving a Rick Ware Racing entry, had spun out and almost drew a caution there during the middle stages. Didn't get the benefit of that caution and got back on the lead lap, finishing in the 10th spot. absolutely remarkable. It almost seemed, looking in the stats and noticing that he'd made more than 100 Xfinity Series starts, including this past week, and still has a won in Xfinity race. It's like, is this going to be one of those drivers that's going to find himself in a situation where he can kind of work his way back up there and end up being more of a factor for the victory? Now, it took quite a lot of crazy stuff for that to happen, but the man still got 10th place, and that's worthy of mention there for sure. So congratulations both to him and the Rick Ware Racing entry on that for getting that performance there too. AJ Allmendinger was very impressive. About the same time that Kyle Busch was starting to make his moves up there, Allmendinger looked like he really had an actual shot at getting Kaulig Racing back to victory lane for the first time in more than a year. I think a lot of people, myself included, probably expected Justin Haley to be a bit more of a factor since he's a past Daytona winner. Yes, in a rain-delayed event, but given his single-handed dominance of Daytona and Talladega in the Xfinity Series, seemed like he was going to be more of a factor in this, but ultimately wasn't at the end of the day. Joey Logano, very squirrely at the end of the race. At one point was actually running below the apron in the tri-oval. I thought he was just going to be completely out of control at the end of this one. I don't know how it got to a point where he was able to reel it back in and get, at least in the unofficial results, a runner-up finish by 0.669 seconds, or 0.6 of a second there. Of course, finish under caution, so that's going to be scrubbed from the record, but that's at least indicated on here, showing him just 1,000th of a second ahead of third place Christopher Bell, at least looking at the NASCAR results here. The wreck in turns 1 and 2 certainly changed the complexion of that, kind of reminiscent of 2001 in the fall race at Talladega, where you had a big wreck coming off that corner and 3 cars left over to settle it amongst themselves, knowing that nobody's going to really legitimately going to be able to get away from each other at that point. And whoever's leading is going to be in a great spot, and that was certainly the case with Stenhouse here. As much as I'm a fan of racing to the line, I don't think we would have had too much of a difference here. Again, could have Logano gotten around him? Certainly did by the time they got to the stripe when they were slowing down. But that's certainly a story for another day there. But I think Logano was very gracious in defeat as well. I think probably it helps with him now being the defending series champion and has a 500 win in the past. I think if we saw that for maybe one of the many drivers that we have had that now have, especially after this race now, that have 10 or more 500 starts without a win. Chase Elliott now is up to 10 500s without a win. Larson up to 11. Keselowski, I think, is up to 15 now. Truex to 20. Kyle Busch to 19. Those streaks are getting up there. It used to be the centrality of Dale Earnhardt's streak back in the 90s, famously ended in 1998. Now we have like a whole clutch of drivers because we're just having these unpredictable winners. Guys like Michael McDowell, guys like Austin Cindric. And while the 500s history has always been littered with drivers like that, like Ricky Stenhouse tonight, you still have other drivers that just can't find their way in there. And is it going to be a situation like a Terry Labonte or Rusty Wallace? Kind of like what they were talking about in the broadcast here too. A lot of big name Hall of Fame drivers that weren't able to pull off the victory there. But does that take anything away from a driver like Stenhouse that pulls off the victory? Absolutely not. And especially in the case of Stenhouse here, where he has this proficiency at super speedways. And yes, he's had a bit of a reputation of being a driver that has been over-aggressive, has been involved in many accidents. There was that one race when he drove the third car for Roush a few years ago, where he just seemed to plow through everybody, including Kyle Busch, involved in multiple accidents along the way, had more enemies than anybody else. I know a lot of people talk about Recky Spinhouse or, anything like that, or any other nicknames he's had. But I think in this race here, it very much played into, his, in this race here, which was very calm, and didn't have a lot of attrition until very late in the race. Not a lot of drivers falling out. Kind of like last year's race. I mean, like last year's race a little bit, just because Stenhouse was good in that one. But Stenhouse kind of lurked back a little bit. We saw him in the top 5 a little bit here and there, but he wasn't really one of the clear contenders. But he kept the car in one piece. He wasn't bouncing off the wall or caving in the fenders or speeding on pit road. I don't know if he caught for any penalties in this race, but he ran a very smooth race, and that's what you have to do. Like Clint Boyer was saying at the beginning of this broadcast, you've got to be perfect, not just good. You got to be absolutely perfect to pull this off. And that's why when it's a win, no matter how much of a long shot the driver is, you got to respect the driver for actually completing it all the way to getting to the finish line there. So I definitely look forward to see what changes, if anything, for the JTG Daugherty team itself. I mean, you really think about them scaling back from 2 chartered entries to a chartered entry in an open car that Ryan Preece drove to now just this only standalone entry. I know I was watching a preview video that a channel put up there that was saying something about like Stenhouse and this team, they're just not going to win. You're not going to be able to compete for wins with this team. But we've seen some times, including the Bristol Dirt Race or even the pavement race out there, that Stenhouse has had some good runs. Was he a top favorite that people were picking for this race coming into it? No, not for sure. I know I certainly wasn't. But this team, time and again, can get some good runs. And if you can get a good run, everybody else is going to have to deal with you. And the move that he made on the back straightaway there to get around, not just Kyle Busch, but Joey Logano, a couple drivers that were very heavily favored coming into this race. I think that was extremely impressive. I know one of you guys is a real big, Stenhouse fan here too. I'm waiting to see him pop up on this list here too, because I know he's got to be absolutely over the moon about this one too. Because I know I've written more than my share of articles on the Last Car page of JTG Daugherty Racing finishing in last. And again, not just Stenhouse, but when Ryan Preece was driving for him, they had 4 in a row in the summer of 2020, including the wreck on pit road in Indianapolis. They've gone through a lot of that, and it has been a number of years since Stenhouse won that pole for the 500 in 2020 when he first jumped on board and after leaving Roush. It's been a difficult transition, and I think the expectations for the team, have been up in the air, but reuniting with his crew chief that he had his most success with, certainly came in handy in this point, created a situation where they could really capitalize on something. And I think that he did a very fine job of pulling this off there. So I was very impressed with that at the same part of this. And yes, thank you for reminding me, Rob F. Yes, Stenhouse during this race was in last place for very briefly before Ty Dillon fell out. He had fallen back all the way to the back end of the pack. And luckily that was at a time when everybody, again, was bunched up very well. I think that was very encouraging. I think it was very encouraging, not just that somebody could work their way from the back to the front still with this package and this particular car, but also the overall strength of the field, that the open teams themselves were able to still be plugged in. Now, I know 3 of those 4 open teams were, expansion teams from existing chartered programs between Pastrana's team, Connor Daly's, and then the other entry with Jimmy Johnson there. But at the same time, I think it really showed that their team, like the money team, that Connor Daly getting into the field and being able to keep up with the group there, the 500, was very impressive. So that was certainly a big part of that too. I guess we could kind of dovetail this into a bit of a discussion there on the dual races at the same time. Certainly talked a little bit about Kyle Busch's accident in Thursday's race that set up the situation in the 500 today with him running the backup car. Also, Travis Pastrana being involved in the incident there going into turn number 3 in Austin Hill that led to, I think, one of the best storylines from this week. That was Connor Daly qualifying for the Daytona 500 this week. And yes, looking at the results with the number 50 car back in the 29th spot, 6 laps down in the unofficial results, I said at the beginning of this race, it's like, look, I think if he doesn't finish last today, this is going to be a huge accomplishment for him. And I think it's also certainly a condemnation of the current system they have that NASCAR has put in place with the practice protocol. You got to have practice before qualifying. You got to have practice before the dual races. All the stuff that the 50 team had to deal with this week, I don't think they would have had to deal with any of it, certainly by the duels, if they had at least those 2 practice sessions, full-length practice sessions out there to get ready for this race. 1 practice to do single car runs to get ready for qualifying, 1 practice session to get ready for racing in the draft, to get ready for the duels. That should have been the absolute priority. And then instead of having a final practice where you have about 10 cars in the field and they can't get back out there, nobody's going to go out there because nobody wants to tear up their stuff. Denny Hamlin mentioning on his podcast and saying that he doesn't want, his teammates going out, his team to go out there and tear up cars because they had like one backup car between them. It's that kind of, ridiculous situation. But in spite of all of that, the importance of getting there to the finish, much like we saw with some of the guys in the 500, Connor Daly's ride going into this, where he had an electrical short in his car, reminiscent of BJ McLeod at Phoenix a couple of years ago, where a short went through the car, fried a bit of the wiring. They couldn't replace, I think it was an oil line that got frazzled, a custom-made piece. They couldn't get it from local sports car shops, according to the radio broadcast. They couldn't get it from another team, so they couldn't get back out there. And then get in another situation where they get the piece, they get it fixed, they get back out there, and now all of a sudden the car is doing this. It's shaking and sputtering in the dual race, like a car out of an old cartoon, like a Disney cartoon, where a car is like coughing and sputtering, and a little jalopy that's like falling to pieces. Like the bumper is like a little smile on it and just falls off the front of it. The thing was just kind of struggling during that. The fact that he stayed out there and actually ran the first part of that race until he could come in, and thankfully the upper window off Justin Haley's car saved his bacon. That he was able to come in there after just a couple of laps of just literally fighting that thing. He said on top of this, it was messing with the handling of the car. He managed to run out there in that ill-handling beast and get back in there. The crew, the Uri crew and all that were able to get everything back together, get things straightened out, and that he was able to just still run out there. Still wasn't running that good, fishing a lap down at the end of that duel, but outlasting the two cars he needed to beat. It used to be you had 60 cars out there, 30 cars in each duel, and you couldn't count on like a two-car. Even two of them being eliminated wasn't enough to automatically get you in there. Sometimes you have leaner years, like Bob Schacht back in 92. I think he made it in by qualifying speed that year in spite of being last in his duel. But in this situation, he was able to outlast that competition, and he deserved that spot. He deserved that spot in the field. That should be something that's celebrated. It shouldn't be like, oh, this race would have been so much better if we got Austin Hill in the field in a Richard Childress car, and oh, Travis Pastrana's primary was way better than his backup or something. It's like, look, it is. I mean, I guess ultimately they got the primary back together, but the point remains, the guy earned his spot. So if there's anybody poo-pooing all over the money team, not deserving these starts, it's a meritocracy of speed out there. If you follow the rules, you present for inspection, and you overcome all the obstacles, and these obstacles exist for everybody. Sometimes just more visible. You deserve that spot in the field, and that was certainly the case with Connor Daly. And I echo a lot of the excitement that David Land expressed in his own video the other night to have this interdisciplinary excitement there between different sports, that you have an IndyCar driver that comes in there that wants to compete in the Daytona 500, be one of the very few that has started both the Indy 500 and the Daytona 500. And I understand from the discussion that David put in his video that apparently if he qualifies for the Indy 500 this year, which it sounds like he will, he'll be of an even more limited class. I believe less than 30 drivers that have ever started the Daytona 500 and Indy 500 in the same year. That's a tremendous accomplishment. I mean, that's got to be a feather in the cap. I know that Derek Daly was mentioning his father, during the week, that Connor had been dreaming of competing in the Daytona 500 since 1992. He was a toddler sleeping. He fell asleep during the race there, but he was there when Davey Allison won in a backup car in the Daytona 500 and got the benefit of that. And to see him make the race, that's what it's all about. And we saw other examples of that too. We'll definitely talk about that, certainly in the ARCA race as well. We'll definitely cover that at the same time here. But I think that was tremendous. And so congratulations to Connor on that. I know he was very frustrated on top of this because after all this happened, he comes into the race and the rear camera doesn't work, so he can't see over the rear spoiler. The fact that he didn't fall out after that and still fought his way through it, I think he deserves a real attaboy for this entire weekend. That was one of the most difficult situations that anybody can face. And they made it work. They made it work for him. And he wasn't a hazard. He wasn't a factor in any of those accidents. He wasn't even a factor in one of those stage ends where AJ Allmendinger and another driver out there were actually holding up the leaders and held up the inside line when Almirola is trying to catch up to the leaders. He wasn't a factor in that. He kind of stayed out of the way which is very hard to do on this track with the speeds that they're turning and how competitive this field is. And that, in fact, he was part of that lead pack for a lot of it. I think he deserves a lot of respect for that. Same thing with Travis Pastrana, too. I know, just touching on him a little bit and seeing the results here. Running the 67 car, made famous by Buddy Arrington. It was good. It did my heart good to see that number back out there right after Arrington's passing this last August. I know that didn't seem really intentional because, I mean, you have the numbers they have at the team. You have the 2-3, the 23, the 4-5, and 45 of Reddick, and now the 6-7. I'd like to think, because Michael Jordan is such a good student of the sport, having grown up seeing Haas Ellington and these other owners of the past, maybe it was in the back of their mind about it. I'd love to find out if that was another reason that they picked that number for Travis. I don't know if there was a logo or anything on the car recognizing that. But to see him make the field, I think, and again, as another person like Connor Daly from a completely different discipline, yes, Travis ran a full-time Xfinity season in 2013. Yes, he's run some truck races as recently as 3 years ago. But still, I mean, another driver that wanted to run in the 500 this much. And, the concern shouldn't be, oh no, what kind of a mess is this person going to create? It's like, no, what can this guy overcome? And we saw this in this case. Yes, he was involved at the accident the last lap of that race, but he's still showing 11th on this, and that is tremendously impressive, given how different this car is, given the fact that he finished well ahead of Jimmy Johnson, who's a 7-time series champion, had to go and jump into this car with no practice and everything else too. Johnson got involved in, it looked like, one more accident than Travis did, but that was the difference, and he survived and made it through. And had a good performance there at the same time. So kudos to him. I don't know what the plans are going forward on the 67 team. If they're going to run some more races, it looks like they've made some merch. So I guess that's, an indication that they got, some idea in that. But I think that was very exciting for him there too. And very exciting for the sport. So good to see him back out there. And, I think all in all, he wasn't really, that much of a problem from that. Now, I don't know if that's going to be received the same way by the other drivers in the field, but that's certainly the way it looked there too. Also looking at the results here, Zane Smith, 13th place. He's had a hell of a weekend, hasn't he? Wins the Daytona truck race for a second consecutive year. Yes, it was rain shortened, and it's unfortunate because the race was really, I think, setting up to be one of the biggest barn burners of the weekend. But the defending series champion, first time that the last year's Truck Xfinity and Cup champions are in the field. Zane joined by, of course, Joey Logano in Cup and Ty Gibbs in the Xfinity Series. It comes out of this after being involved in, I think, the Austin Dillon accident, showing in the 13th spot there at the finish. Great job by him. Matches with that 17th place run that he ran for Chris Buescher as the relief driver at Gateway last year. He's off to a very promising start in the Cup Series, and I hope he gets some more chances in that 36 car this year. It'll certainly beef up the size of the fields and I think add an extra layer of complexity. This is a guy that maybe further down the line can start getting those top 10s and be more competitive with everybody else. So don't sleep on Zane. He's going to be really good coming up here too. And I'm very impressed with what he and the Front Row Motorsports team have done this week. Cody Ware, 14th place run. Got to give a shout out to the Ware team on that as well. Joining his teammate Riley Herbst, who we talked about there, just a few spots behind. Cody got that top 10 in the August race at Daytona last year. Very exciting to see that. Had a lot of survive and advance in that race at the same time. But again, good performance out of him there. Not a career best like the 6th place run was, but certainly a step in the right direction and puts them in a good spot and points going into Fontana and the rest of the year this time around. One team that was a little disappointed that they kind of struggled a bit in this race was BJ McLeod. I was very impressed with how well he had done in qualifying, that he was ahead of the Spire Motorsports entries, that he was ahead of the Rick Ware entries and, one or two others in time trials, that in the duels, even when he lost a lap, he still was able to suck up on other cars and keep up in the draft. I had hoped that he'd been able to keep up this way in this. I lost track of him during this race. I don't know what the issue was, but I saw at some point he was dropping further back. Ultimately, in the race results, he did finish under power 8 laps down in the 30th spot, just one spot behind Connor Daly. But I was hoping he'd maybe have an outside shot, at least a top 25 in this one. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. We'll see next week in Fontana during our trackside coverage. Maybe we'll get the rest of that story and see what was going on there. But I think that's going to be another one to certainly be talking about. Oh, Death Killer. Yes, thanks for reminding me. Yes, Todd Gilliland, you're right. He's scaled back to being a part-timer this year. I keep forgetting Gilliland's not full-time this year in the 38. And it's certainly easy to forget about after the Thursday run in the duels where he had that incredible recovery to keep from spinning out in the car there. Just tremendous car control and also good car control from everybody behind him to make sure he had enough room to not run over him there. But if it does turn out that Zane's going to be running a lot of those races, that's going to be definitely something that's going to be helping him out. And I think they'll have a good program. In a perfect world, they'd have 3 cars there. They could put both of them in there. But I guess that's the situation going forward there for the Front Row Motorsports team. So we'll see what's going to be happening there at the same time. Justin Haley, we talked about him a little bit earlier, 32nd spot for him, 9 laps down. But looking at the rest of this here. Kevin Harvick, good recovery from the incidents there to finish in the 12th spot. And everything else from there. I guess from here, let's see. We could talk. Okay, we got about talk about the dual races. We kind of lumped the dual races into this already a little bit. Certainly the Connor Daly discussion. I guess we could talk about the commercials more at this point here. Like I said at the beginning of the stream here, I didn't notice the commercials being as much of an issue. In fact, I thought a couple of the ads they did were actually a bit more well produced. That you had ads for, the Goodyear ad there that actually had Bill Elliott narrating in it. I thought there was a decent promo that Fox did during the broadcast that showed the 75th anniversary, much more recognition and celebration of the history, and showing other aspects of it. There's another one that had the Dale Jr. ad that had Janet Guthrie mentioned in it. I thought that was very well done. I think there's a lot that that was pretty good, but it got to a point, where it's like, I don't know. I'd be interested to see what, I guess, is it still Cause and Jaws that tracks the number of commercials? I know it used to be on J-Ski, but I know there's a commercial breakdown that's still kind of done. It would be interesting to understand how many different companies sponsored it, because I'd like to know how much of that was, it's just the 500 and you got a lot of sponsors that just want to have, their ad space, or how much of it was, these ads over and over and over again. I kind of lost track of which ads were being played a lot. Obviously, ads for Wendy's seem to be a big deal because, I think they just went all in after that push with Noah Gragson in the 62 car last year, and now doing it with the 42 car. I think that seems to be a big part of that. But I'd like to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, well, maybe it was just a lot of ads because you had a lot of people that were requesting ad space. But maybe if it was a situation where you just have the same ads over and over, that was getting pretty obnoxious. And I understand there was some discussion about maybe they were front loading the ads so they didn't have a lot of commercial breaks at the end, although they still did. I think the most egregious one, and certainly what turned the corner for me, was when they had the Tyler Reddick wreck and they didn't interrupt the commercial at all. In fact, it happened very early. I think it was like in the first commercial of that break, if memory serves, and they played like 4 or 5 other commercials, like the entire break. They just sat through the entire thing, and they're probably like, they have the side by side, they can see what's happening. It's like, okay, well, that's true, and I guess they're showing what's happening, but I can't help but think back to 2001, and they're in the midst of a Budweiser commercial which I think played during the Super Bowl. So this is like a high ticket sponsor, and they cut it right off when the wreck happened, and they broke in and they showed like all this was happening. Maybe this wreck wasn't big enough that they felt needed to qualify for it, which is kind of absurd in its own right there. But they could have just jumped into it even for a bit, and I would have excused like a longer actual, commercial break afterwards to play into it, which I think they did in 2001, because at that point it was a red flag, and, why not do that? But it was really kind of a different situation there with that. So I think that was kind of, that was unfortunate. So I'd like to learn more about that. I'll be interested to see what the commercial breakdown was, but I will say that, I agree that at least at surface level, the number of commercials and certainly how frequently they jumped in was getting a lot of control, which is too bad, because I think, especially after doing the starting grids, and especially when last place was settled really quickly, I was kind of just settling into the rhythm of the race and just kind of focusing more on it at that point. You'll notice that usually on my Twitter feed, I'm not as active once the last place is set, Because usually at that point, I kind of shift into fan mode and kind of just track what's going on in the race and just kind of watch it there. And if something really stands out at me, like Clint Boyer talking about itching his nose instead of his arm, I'll point it out at that point. But that's not going to be what I usually do at that point. And that'll be the same even in my trackside stuff too. Really at this point, I was kind of just enjoying it. I liked that there was low attrition. I liked there were long green flag runs. I liked that there weren't a lot of cautions thrown for nothing. I liked they didn't throw the caution for Riley Herbst spinning out. And I was looking for positives. I always get so much criticism that I'm always negative all the time. And I'm like, okay, let me just try to be positive on this. And I'm like, okay, so I'm not going to say this. I'll be a little playful about this. And I really was enjoying myself. I really was. It's like I was looking, I didn't have to look for positives. I really thought the commercials were better. I thought the camera angles were better. I thought Clint Boyer wasn't as obnoxious as he was at the Clash. I thought this was bumping along just fine. I thought the pit reporters did good. I like Josh Sims. I think he does a solid job. I think he should have been the one garage reporting instead of Michael Waltrip. I not that I don't count Waltrip's skills there with that, but I think, his playful side of it doesn't really work well with interviewing people that just came back from the medical center. I think that probably would have been better with either Jamie Little or Josh Sims. But that's a small picking. It seemed like small issues, but once it got to the commercials and certainly once, the wrecks started stacking up, that's where it gets to be kind of a little bit more irritating there. And then, certainly at that point, I was kind of noticing where the wind was blowing there in a lot of the discussion there. Which is too bad. It was too bad that you had that, and it was too bad that you had a big field clearing wreck at the end of this. I think if Daniel Suarez didn't spin out at the end of this, I think we could have had a finish at least as good as 2016. Maybe Busch would have won, maybe not. We would have probably had a photo finish. Second groove would have still developed like at the start of the race, and we would have had at least something close to that. When you had these restarts, you just knew it was going to be a complete crapshoot. You're going to have people going three wide and piling into each other. And unfortunately, that's what we ended up happening at this case there. So that ended up being the situation there. So, I think generally I really enjoyed a lot of this race. I leave a little bit frustrated because Kyle Busch was my fantasy pick. And I thought I was going to gain some points on Lastbro because he picked Truex and he got in those couple of wrecks. Then, of course, Truex gets the car pieced together and gets a decent finish out of this. And Kyle ends up further back in the lineup. But those are the breaks. So, but other than that, I thought it was a solid 500. I'll be very interested to see the pre-race and how it set the tone. But I thought that was fine. So, and I've seen way worse than this. I'm glad it got to the distance. I'm glad the weather cooperated instead of like it did on Friday night with the storm that shouldn't have been there. And now suddenly it's like, okay, now it's Florida. I mean, you don't like the weather. What do they always say? You don't like the weather in Florida, wait 5 minutes. So I guess that was just the product of that more than anything else. So there was that there too. Let's see. Other stories from that. Bubba Wallace back in the order, still on the lead lap at the finish, the 20th spot there. Did get involved in that accident at the very end of the race there, but overcame the toe link issue. I don't know if he actually got the toe link replaced after the contact from Truex. I would have been interested to find out on that. It looked like he slapped the wall there, and I don't think he could have run as well as he did in the middle and later stages of that race unless they replaced it, which would add it onto the list of guys like Joey Logano at Atlanta last year or Denny Hamlin at Gateway where people were actually able to replace it. I know they've adjusted the crash clock a bit. He did clear the crash clock early before I think they even had a chance to fix it. So hopefully that was something that worked out there, but ultimately still ends up back in the order there. Let's see here. We can get into the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series results here at the same time. I want to try something at the same time. I was messing around with the screen here, and I want to see if I can actually share my screen at the same time. I was having trouble with that earlier. Let me try this. Okay, so it goes smaller there. Does this work again? There we go. Okay, good. It does work on the screen. Okay, this is one of the other things I've been working on here trying to do this. I probably should have done this for the entire first segment here. We'll do this, I guess, for the Xfinity part of it. Okay, wow, it actually even shows the pull down from the top. That's nice. All right. I wish I did that purposefully. I think I just set this window accidentally, but we can jump into, we got the truck results here, and we can get the Xfinity results at the same time and pull that up. So let's see. I need a drink here for sure. We'll get into trivia here a little bit later tonight here, folks. And I saw I had a couple super chats. Thank you so much for those for sure. I want to make sure I get those read off. And I also want to talk about the ARCA race too. So we got a lot on our plate tonight. So if you're tuned in for tonight, thank you so much. We have 187 people in here. We'll definitely have a lot more to discuss, just kind of wrapping up the 500 discussion, and we'll get into other features here along the way. All righty. So a little bit of everything in the Xfinity race. You do see the results on your screen there with the results there for Austin Hill pulling off the second straight win in this. I know the numerologists seem to suggest that Austin Cindric would pull off the 500 today, given the fact that both the truck race and the Xfinity race were won by the exact same people from last year. So that was kind of an unusual situation, but still it could have been very easy, to kind of change everything else at that point there. Not a big fan of the way that race finished there. You had a big flip down the back straightaway. NASCAR really had no choice but to throw the caution flag at the end, as much as I hate to admit it. But it was definitely a situation where, it's, I think really what it came down to is Austin Hill is in the high lane there. He's pretty much in a dead heat with Nemechek, but Nemechek's clearly below the line with Myatt Snyder right behind him. I don't think they were going to give the win to Nemechek just from the fact that he was below the line at that point. They probably wanted to avoid that altogether. And I think even if they couldn't decide at the moment of caution, if Hill was clearly ahead, I think they just went for the simplest solution. And that was the case there. And I think it's also, as a concession, they at least had a situation where John Hunter still got the second place spot. I'll still say this. I was surprised during a lot of the Xfinity broadcasts, they seem to be sleeping on Nemechek so much as being a championship favorite, that everybody's talking about Cole Custer just because he has a cup, he has all his cup experience, and he won 7 races his last full Xfinity season. I think it's Nemechek's to lose. I think he's going to be very tough, especially after how good Ty Gibbs was back then. I think Nemechek has been trying to kind of get into a more full-time effort. We've seen him come close to the truck championship before. Yes, some ridiculous stuff has happened along the way to keep him from getting across the line. But I think at the same time, he's very much capable of actually pulling off a decent run there. And I think that second place finish is going to be the first step towards him being every bit as dangerous as some of these other drivers out there. Austin Hill, certainly can't overlook him. He certainly seems to have carved out a niche as being a great super speedway driver, kind of taken Justin Haley's place there on the Xfinity Series side. But also the other thing you got to talk about, certainly from that race, is just the complete failure of JR Motorsports in the same sense here, that you had, you had those 4 JR Motorsports teammates right behind Austin Hill, and none of them could pull it off. That was just a catastrophic failure of teammates up there. I mean, at any point, they could have started their own draft and got around the 21 car. They made the 21 seem like it was Dale Jarrett from 2000. Now, I have no doubt that he had one of the fastest, if not the fastest car in the field, but he was certainly somebody that, they could have worked their way around at some point there. I was reminded so much of Phoenix last year where, and again, not a drafting track and different circumstances and to an extent, but even with Noah Gragson out there, just not being able to get that extra step, get that extra leg up, either strategy-wise or anything, to get around Ty Gibbs. And it was just Gibbs' race to lose at that point, and he did not lose it. So, just absurd in this case. I think it was just insane. And, it's so frustrating for a lot of these other teams that are trying to get up there and that are clawing their way up. I do think the Xfinity Series has become a lot stronger. Certainly with the scaling back of Cup Series regulars. I do think there's another strategy that can, I think, settle that debate once and for all. I already kind of bent everybody's ear about that in my article I posted last week before qualifying. But I think just base it off playoff eligibility. I think that's the best way to do it. Base it off playoff eligibility, and then how many starts you get, that depends whether or not you have a charter. Let's put some strings on, let's attach some strings to actually having guaranteed starts in the Cup Series and determining that. I think that the fact that NASCAR hasn't firmly defined what driver that isn't, shouldn't be the lower series. That needs to be, solidified. It's not just any Cup driver. Does anybody have a problem with, Ross Chastain last year before he started winning? No. But after he won all those races and went for the championship 4, yeah, I think people's perception would be very different. And that's really the issue at the heart of that there. But we did see some good runs out of a lot of these programs that have kind of worked their way back into the Xfinity Series. Parker Retzlaff, for sure, the legend of this driver, and just his 10th start in the series, his first for Jordan Anderson after driving for Chris Auer in RSS last year. Great run for him there. I think this kid can be really dangerous. He gets himself into a top ride, or he elevates this team to being the position of a JR Motorsports or something. That's going to be really interesting, because it always seems like there's whoever's leading, there's like a glut of JR Motorsports cars, and then there's the best of who everybody else is. And right now, that could be JR Motorsports. That could be RSS Racing. That could be one of these teams. And once they start picking off some of those JR guys and getting up to the lead, that's going to be the most compelling part of this Xfinity Series season. And especially with so many drivers and teams that at least are trying to attempt the full season. I know that that's going to definitely be challenging after this week, where we saw a lot of small teams miss the field for Daytona, including the Harmon team. So they're behind the 8 ball just like they were last year with their one car. That's going to be really interesting to see come up this year. I hope it stays as competitive, and I hope the entry list stay as big as they have been for this opening round, because that'll be really interesting. So mentioning Retzlaff, Joe Graf Jr., great run for him. I know, much like Riley Herbst and Ricky Stenhouse, talking about on the Cup side here, here's a driver that I think gets a lot of, maybe not out and out hate, but just dismissive attitudes. I understand that there's, certain complexities with the sponsorship and what he's been able to make happen. I know there's some DNQs he's had with other more well-heeled teams. But again, he's developed a bit more consistency in the sport. I think his run for RSS last year, although it was in place of Timmy Hill last year, he did make the most of it, and he had a good run out there. And then in this one, where you had, a series of crashes and long green flag runs, the fact that he went from 29th to finish 7th in this race, right with his teammate Ryan Sieg, that's definitely worthy of respect and having a good finish out there. So kudos to Joe Graf Jr. Hopefully that's the beginning of something better for him. He's going to be splitting time this year with RSS and Joe Gibbs this year, which is tremendous. Obviously the best opportunity he's ever had, really. And with this culture out here, where you have maybe a couple guys that you can really think of as championship favorites, John Hunter Nemechek for sure. Yes, Cole Custer to an extent. Yes, Justin Allgaier and the JR Motorsports guys, maybe. But, that still leaves some open spaces for some of these other guys to get up there too. We saw the good and the bad. The bad side, of course, wearing the Parker Kligerman sweatshirt here. That was too bad how that played out there. Kligerman starting outside pole for Big Machine Racing, a great start for him. Really felt like this was going to be, getting a good finish to kind of set the tone for the year. But unfortunately, at Daytona, sometimes stuff happens here and sometimes mistakes are made. Unfortunately, Kligerman ended up being involved in a couple of incidents in this one. The one was Sheldon Creed entering turn 1, eliminated both Creed and several other cars back in the pack. And then within the last 10 laps of the race, or 10 or 20 laps of the race, Jeffrey Earnhardt is on his way to a top 10 finish, minding his own business in the high lane in Alpha Prime's number 44 car. Kligerman's trying to kind of leapfrog him and get back in line. He doesn't seem to really have an opening. He's about half car length or so on that. Tries to go up, puts the 44 in the wall. They got a cut tire, lose a lap. They lose that top 10 run. I don't blame Jeffrey at all for being as upset as he was and confronting Kligerman. It's good that it didn't come to blows or anything. There's a lot of footage of it. But you think back to, again, Joe Graf Jr. That was one I filmed at Phoenix a couple years ago, where, a bit of that frustration that came out of Earnhardt there showed up with Graf there at the same time. Now, in that case, that was a situation where both of them wrecked each other out. This was one where he had a great run at Daytona on February 18th, of course, the day that we lost Dale Earnhardt, and trying to get a good run, maybe even a better run than the 10th place run there. And certainly something that could help the Alpha Prime team out as they expand to 3 cars this year. It's unfortunate that didn't turn out, but maybe that's something that, will, still kind of ignite a fire in that 44 team. and they can keep going forward from here. Jeffrey had a lot of adversity to overcome at Fontana last year, where he was going for the lead, or not going for the lead, but going for a top 10 finish and having some mechanical issues, flat tires and stuff that dropped him back in the order. But hopefully it'll be a similar situation to turn around. And for Kligerman too. I think that sometimes, this stuff happens. It's not a great start to the year, but I really hope that he doesn't get, the bum's rush out of there like Jake Buford did. I still think that was unfair. I like that Buford got a ride with Big Machine for this race to start the year. I didn't like when they put the Cup Series regulars, especially like Tyler Reddick and Stenhouse in those cars for a lot of that year. It was nice when they got Nick Sanchez in there because that led to him getting his Truck Series ride. At least it opened an opportunity for another new star in the sport. But with Kligerman this year, it's just one race. I think, it's back to normal here this next week. I think he's got a good chance at making something happen with that 48 this year. I'm very excited by the opportunity he has. He's certainly, more than paid his dues this last decade. I mean, you think about, 2013 when Travis Pastrana was last full-time in the Xfinity Series. Parker Kligerman was just trying to get a Cup Series deal together when he was driving for Swan Racing, which is a 2-car effort. It was him and Cole Witt, I believe it was. They were both going for Rookie of the Year, and they had issues with sponsorship. Kligerman got in a wreck in the 500 that totaled his car. It was just a mess from the start of the year. I think it kind of set him back for a few years where he had to kind of earn his stripes again. And remember that he was as good as he was in ARCA, getting up through the ranks as he was with the Cunningham team. But then now, getting back into the sport here this year, I don't think this is going to be something that's going to wipe all that away. I think he's just going to, it's getting back into the rhythm of it again. And he's more than earned the opportunity. And I think he's also earned, a bit of, of latitude as he kind of gets his feet back under him. I hate it for Jeffrey Earnhardt. But again, just one of those racing deals that turned out there. And hopefully things turn out for Kligerman in these upcoming races here. So we'll see how that plays out. One of the many storylines in the series there is at the same time. Stephen Parsons came in as the super sub there for Alpha Prime in the third car there, the number 45. Certainly hoping Cesar Baccarella is feeling better after he felt ill after qualifying the car 17th on the grid. Stephen coming back to finishing in the 13th spot there in the race. Some of the other runners further back, Gray Galding getting into the top 20. Galding reuniting with the daughter team. I think it's another big story this year. In 2019, back when he was driving for the 08 team back then, and he had the Panini car, he had so many good runs, especially on the super speedways. I think he was like 13th or 14th in points, was like right up there, had a fine showing. I'd love to see him kind of return to that again. This is another driver that's kind of been shuffled out to a couple different organizations, had to kind of claw his way back in. I think that's one of the best stories you can follow. And I think maybe after the success of a guy like A.J. Allmendinger or like Ricky Stenhouse tonight in the 500, could be something to kind of change that for other guys in the lower series too. And I think that's going to be another story that'll be something to look at the same time. Absolute heartbreaker for our good buddy Anthony Alfredo, a.k.a. Tony Sauce. We're coming up on the anniversary of his Xfinity debut when he drove for Childress at Fontana a couple of years ago. Now in this one, driving for BJ McLeod's team. BJ's effort, one of the smaller programs out there. We've seen them compete for last car championships before. The 5 team last year with Matt Mills had a lot of struggles. But now we come into it this year. Anthony Alfredo driving the 78 car, kind of the flagship entry for that program. We've seen that team kind of springboard the careers of drivers like Tommy Joe Martins and other competitors there. This time around, Alfredo's in there. He stayed among the leaders during the opening stages. He got back up there at the late stages. Looked like he was going to have a real shot at least a top 10 finish. He was about 15th when Sam Mayer got turned on the backstretch. Unfortunately, couldn't avoid it. Ended up eliminated at the back of the pack, finishing back in the 24th spot there. So an unfortunate deal for him, but hopefully things turn around for him in these upcoming races along the way. Looking further back here, Blaine Perkins, Ryan Ellis, other drivers having trouble there in the early stages. None more so than Bailey Curry. My heart just breaks for him on that. For one thing, he had a really cool looking paint scheme. I love the hurricane-themed the hurricane awareness scheme with a lot of different operations in Florida that are part of that. Lowe's is being an associate sponsor on the car. I think it had one of the best looking cars in the Xfinity race. Him and Brandon Jones's number 9 car, I think, was gorgeous as well. A lot of really good paint schemes out there. But unfortunately, according to Team Radio, I haven't heard further details on this yet. The transmission came out of gear. That caused some damage to the engine just a few laps into the race, just 8 laps into the race, and ends up dropping out of the event there very early in the race. The last year's Xfinity Series last car champion, who just had 2 last place finishes. It wasn't really a condemnation of anything of his season. He wasn't even really in contention for that championship until he finished last in the next to last race of the year at Martinsville. Ultimately took the lead from his teammate Brennan Poole in the final race of the season there. So it turned out very differently in that situation. But still, rough start for him there. Hopefully things work out better. I'm a little concerned about the JD team there because at the same time, Brennan Poole had an engine let go in the late stages of that one, and he finished back down in the 33rd spot there. So a rough deal at the same time there. Rough deal for teams that didn't make the race. I touched on this a little bit about some of the small teams that missed the race, including both cars from Motorsports Business Management. That was terrible, in particular for Timmy Hill, who was second in the race last August. I think everybody was very excited to see what he would do to follow up with that. Unfortunately, wasn't able to qualify for the race. His teammate Dexter Stacy, who hasn't attempted, I think, an Xfinity race since, 2012, missed the field by just a fraction there. And couldn't make the show at the same time there. They have a very steep hill to climb next week at Fontana as they try to get as many points as possible and offset the losses of starting the big race at the beginning of the year at Daytona. That'll be one thing to certainly follow next week there during our trackside coverage there at the Auto Club Speedway of Southern California. Let's see here. Looking at other stories through the field there. Justin Haley, 10th. In Landon Castle's car there, despite a bit of damage there, suffered in the early laps there. But yeah, Austin Hill with a second straight victory in the Xfinity Series race there. Moving to the Truck Series race here as well. Talked about Zane Smith again. Congratulations to him on the second straight win. Yes, it was unfortunate that it was rain shortened. I think NASCAR went way above and beyond to try to get that race in there. What was it? Well past, I think it was past 7 o'clock Pacific here, that they were still drying the track and looking to get those last 20 laps in. I think we were setting up to have a really good finish in that. I know it's easy to say that of a race that we didn't get to finish to, but I think it was very competitive. And much like last year's race, didn't quite have as much of those big field clearing wrecks in the first 2/3 of it there. And so you actually got to see people racing each other and fighting those trucks to try to keep them between the lines. That's really, really exciting to see there too. I thought they had a decent field of entries through there. I was happy to do the starting grid video for that, especially being the first Craftsman Truck Series race. It's cool to see Zane Smith get the toolbox there in Victory Lane, at least some pictures of it after the race. So certainly good to see there at the same time. Kudos to Josh Realm's team for getting both their trucks out there after that fire they had literally 3 weeks before the race. A tremendous turnaround for that program there. And coming back, I believe they had both their trucks in one piece. I'm seeing Jason White in the 21st spot and Mason Massey in 24th. Chris Hacker posted a great video on Twitter of just how emotional he was and how happy he was to qualify for this race for On Point. I think we saw a lot of raw emotion there, certainly during this weekend, from a number of competitors, but his is certainly included in that. A fine showing from him there. Still finished back in the 25th spot, but qualifying for the race and being a part of Daytona history, his first Daytona start. That's, massive for any of these drivers. You really know what it means to even be there as a competitor, and then how much more it means to be a winner, and, what you dream of, and hopefully making, more starts at the same place and kind of working your way up there at the same time. Yeah, I get your point, Sir Wrinklestein. Yeah, about the 34 shouldn't be in the field because they had such a slow lap. Again, I'm willing to be a bit more forgiving on that just because of the shop fire they had. I know that it sucks that you have these other programs that missed the cut. Certainly Lawless Allen, it sounded like they were going to be buying a ride in the field. And I was worried that grid was going to be outdated by the time I posted it there. But it turned out ultimately that was a different situation. Brian Dozett's team, some of these other organizations out there that missed the cut that you usually see at Daytona. It's going to be kind of a long wait for them. But again, kudos to them, and hopefully that's something that helps them kind of recover from there. Yes, Jason White, which one we're talking about? Yes, I'm talking about Canadian Jason White. Also, of course, the second place finisher in the, or was it second place in the ARCA race this past week? Yes, we're talking about, that would be, I believe, Jason M. White. I thought it was interesting they had that on the results. You had, we're down to middle names here when you have two drivers with the same name. Very unusual on this. I think on my last car results, I think I put it like a truck driver versus a cup driver from like a different era, and they both were like Brad Smith or something like that, or Jack Smith, I think it was. They came up on the list there, so that was certainly one. But yeah, not too much more I could really say about the Truck Series race. I was very impressed with the car or truck control, I guess, of a lot of the field there. It was too bad that the rain cautions was screwing that up, because then you just couldn't get into a long enough run. I think we would have had a race at least as close to what we had last year if that hadn't happened. I know I made a joke about this in the starting grid there about Chase Elliott being swapped in for Jake Garcia. Yeah, I understand the whole thing about Jake Garcia not being old enough to run a super speedway, but then you got like a whole list of like 6 other drivers that didn't qualify for the race. You also have other drivers that are working on crews, like Brad Perez was down there. You telling me you couldn't get him into the truck? It's like, no, we have to have Chase Elliott. Like, why? Like, okay, come on. Like, probably in this case here, and again, I don't know this, but probably the situation that happened behind the scenes is that Napa is a big investor in the McAnally team, and probably they have a deal where if they need to get Chase Elliott, they probably can make it work out, or at least make it a lot easier for him to be in there. Although that truck was only had like associate sponsorship from Napa. In fact, it was the sponsor from the 91 truck that they closed down last year that Colby Howard was running. If anything, Howard would have, could have been in there still, but obviously they parted ways and he was with a different team, so that wasn't going to happen. But, that's where I think that was just kind of absurd. But Chase really wasn't a factor in the race there anyway, so I guess no harm, no foul on that. Except for the people that didn't qualify. I'm sure they would take issue with that a bit differently. Too bad for Dean Thompson being involved in the accident there at the beginning of that race. Ends up finishing last in the Truck Series race for a second straight year. A bit of a bummer for him there. He was very upset in his interview, as well he should be. Talking about how big of an opportunity this is with him going to Tricon Garage, and how much he struggled last year in the Nice team. Very nearly was the person I was going to give the certificate to last year, if not for a series of terrible runs that Spencer Boyd had down the stretch. That certificate was going to go to Dean Thompson easily. But things changed around, and that wasn't the situation. I think we saw it again, the theme of emotion here, how much he wants to prove himself, Thompson did. And I think he knows that a lot of people are looking at him and saying, like, okay, well, why did he get this opportunity with this new powerhouse Toyota team? Why not this guy? Why not this guy? Even to the point where he had the sponsorship from Worldwide Express last year, and his sponsors started to go different places, you notice. It started to go to Carson Hocevar, his teammate. It started to go to Ross Chastain at Team Trackhouse. That played a role in the back of his mind. I don't know what exactly it was, but something was going on there at the same time, and that made it very difficult there too. Hopefully he bounces back. We're not going to know till Vegas in a couple weeks here, but we'll find out how that shakes out and see how much speed he can get out of those Toyota trucks, because it's a jungle out there in the Truck Series. You got a lot of talent in there, a lot of people that are on different phases of the ladder. It's just as competitive as ever. I don't think it's quite as competitive as Xfinity this year. I think that's where the real action is going to be with all those full-timers, depending on how many still are able to commit to it, even if they get a few DNQs this year. But that's going to be another thing to certainly be looking at going forward here. But Zane Smith, your winner. Tanner Gray, I believe that's a career best for him, the runner-up finish in the number 15 truck for the Tricon Garage effort. Let me look that up here. Yes, he had third place finishes, looks like 4 times before under the original David Gilliland Racing banner, but a great turnaround there for him. Christian Eckes, Colby Howard, and Grant Enfinger rounding out your top 5 there. But again, Dean Thompson, your last place finisher. First last place run for the number 5 in a Truck Series race at any track since 2012, which is very, very different on there. I only want to take a moment here, but I do want to make sure I touch on this too with the ARCA Series opener at Daytona there. Greg Van Alst, I mean, a tremendous run for him. Win one for the little guys for sure. This is a guy that has been documented by many others already. Was an ARCA, 20 years ago. Went to late models for a while. Just started to kind of get his organization back together again. Try to get back out there. That was the most real reaction I think we saw from anybody this weekend. Was certainly the emotion we saw with that interview. Kudos to the folks at Fox for letting that play out. And just showing that, and as he said, showing that like a short tracker can win at a super speedway, even though in his words he was saying, look, guys like me aren't supposed to win here. I mean, we heard that from Regan Smith when he won the Southern 500. Such a cool moment, and to get it back up there. And yeah, and I hate it for Jason M. White, the Canadian one, for getting beat off that last corner there. He put on a great showing as well. I mean, the Eric McClure team just as much deserved as anybody else out there in those organizations. And, you're so used to seeing whether it was Bobby Gerhart dominating the ARCA 200 or the Kimmel team, but not Frank Kimmel himself for whatever reason. And then you have like the Venturini cars for sure. And now you got Joe Gibbs up there. You could see you had one of the strongest ARCA fields in a very long time. And then who comes out on top? It's actually one of the underdogs. It's not one of these new highly touted organizations. It's a guy that's been scrapping to try to just get every bit of an advantage he can get and makes a pass on the final lap at Daytona. And I think both of them, both these drivers are going to be, actually the same situation for them there. So they're both going to have a story they can go back with. And yes, Anthony, thank you for bringing it up there too. Give a shout out to Frankie Muniz as well. I think that was another ride, much like with other drivers that people were expecting, okay, Austin Cindric in the booth is going to bring up Agent Cody Banks and Malcolm in the middle, and he was almost 17th in the grid, so he'd be halfway through the field. Like, okay, sure. Like, okay, I get it. And I know he's heard it plenty of times, I'm sure, in the time that he's been working with it. And really since 2001, when he appeared in, like the clips you saw in 500 Days and have been shown in other places as well, the standalone clips on YouTube, met Dale Earnhardt, met Ken Schrader, and now had this opportunity with, the Rhett Jones team to get in the number 30 car there, the Hair Club entry that was Sterling Marlin's car from the 2001 Daytona 500. All indications said that it was. I wasn't there. I didn't see the crossbar in there, but everything I heard said that it was that car, and had an 11th place finish out of that, almost had a top 10, overcame some damage. I mean, Lastbro in particular was very skeptical about that, but he was really impressed when it came to the finish of that race there. And, Frankie was just beside himself on the run that he had out there. And so again, I think there were a lot of positives from this Speed Weeks, and these were just such tremendous stories that they had from all these different competitors out there. I think there's a lot of positives. There's definitely some things that still need to be worked on. I'm glad, for one thing, that we didn't see any cockpit fires, at least not that we heard. It's hard to tell with how fragmented the Cup broadcast was. But we didn't have any cockpit fires like we had at the Clash, so maybe that was really an issue with the muffler, and that's only being run at a certain number of races. And I guess we got a few races, so we have to deal with that again. But certainly, I mean, they got to get, the commercials are getting out of control. There's got to, I want to learn more about how many different brands are represented and what was going on with that. They need to change the practice protocol. They got to have practice at the single car practice before the qualifying, and you got to have a group qualifying before the duels at the very least. I mean, if you're going to scrub anything, scrub happy hour, and then maybe add another support race to the weekend. Figure something out that way. I think it just felt off. And I think a lot of the things that happened, perhaps, it was both the situation for Connor Daly, where perhaps it was the reason that he got in, that the schedule was structured that way. And also that schedule could have kept him out too. It could have very easily because, if you had practice at the beginning, maybe those other teams would have been faster and they wouldn't have even been near where Connor was, or maybe they wouldn't have been in a wreck. It's hard to tell, but, certainly it's something I think that needs to be re-examined, certainly going forward. So yeah, I think those are big parts of that there for sure. Let's see. Do we have any other updates on? Let me check this here. Let's see. Peak late stage. Yeah, exactly. Oh, goodness. Yeah. I didn't count on this tweet getting so much attention. Waiting for Fox to come up with a side-by-side format where they could play two commercials simultaneously. It's like, yeah, I hate to give them ideas, but yeah, who knows? It's like, yeah, this pesky race broadcast just getting in the way. If only they had something that would just kind of distract from that for a moment. But I don't know. It's kind of one of that whole situation there. Let's see here. Let me get caught up on the super chats here. I'm kind of slowing down on the race broadcast here, but again, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Let me jump into this. First of all, Beast of Metal. Oh my goodness, 20. Thank you so much, Beast of Metal, for your super chat there. A total newbie watching his first race in Tom Grossi was able to recognize that his bewilderment over the finish was aggravated by a fundamentally broken broadcast. This problem keeps getting worse year over year. Well, I mean, that's the perspective that needs to be heard, especially from folks at NASCAR. If you are new to this sport, yeah, I think you got to be the most vocal on this, because I think NASCAR is really listening to them right now. They're not. I mean, I think they've kind of either, they feel like they've either appeased long-term fans, or they're just kind of tuning them out more or less at this point. As much as I do think that, I think they've sought some compromises like bringing back North Wilkesboro and so forth, which are big compromises. But I think they'd be very interested to hear what new fans or what people have no background in the sport would have to say. I think it's very jarring that one of those many commercials you notice was a Toyota ad that started off with a guy saying, "Yeah, I just saw my first race," but you never hear what he thinks about it. Isn't it interesting? Martin Truex shows up like, "It's a new race fan here. Like, let me show you this. Let me show you this." And he's whisked through these like different drivers from the Toyota group, and like, okay, that's cool and everything. But Lastbro said it like right away when we were watching. It's just like, hey, he didn't say whether he liked it or not. So that's something that needs to be brought up, and it's difficult. And I think this is where, again, I'd like to learn more about the commercial breakdown and how it's structured. If it was a case of all these, is it Super Bowl scenario? Is it that all these brands know that the Daytona 500 is the biggest event, and they're just jamming themselves into this event, and it's just breaking up the broadcast? So you have 3-4 commercial breaks in the first like 30 laps. It just gets ridiculous, and you can't get into a rhythm of what's happening even during long green flag runs. That's certainly a problem. But is it a question of too many ads? Ads that, by the way, could be team sponsors maybe instead, or whatever the deal is. Or is it a situation they're playing the same ads over and over again? That's where I'm not sure. But I'd love to hear the breakdown on that, and I'd love to hear what new fans have to say about it. Beast of Metal, thank you for bringing that up, because, yeah, I mean, I think that may be more typical. I think it would have been very hard for me if I was bringing a fan or a friend or somebody over and saying, like, hey, this is the Daytona 500. This is as big of a race as it gets. This is really exciting. This is as high stakes as it gets. Yeah, they probably would have been confused by a few things. I don't think they would have been I think it would have been more confusing than the Clash would have been. Even with, all the things that were different from a traditional race in that event, where you had the halftime break, where you have the concerts, you have all that other stuff there. I think that would have been easier to follow. I think people probably would have watched that and said, wow, this looks like a party. This looks like someplace I'd rather be. This looks like a lot of fun. But in this one here, it was broken up so much that, yeah, I think it would have been hard to kind of get into that rhythm, even though it's a much longer race over a longer distance. So I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say. But you raised a very good point, though, and I hope that gets discussed more coming up here. Michael Jensen, thank you for your super chat. When Fox showed the caution for Blaney losing the tread on his tire, MRN said that Bowman made the save of his life. Fox never showed anything about it. I had it on mute. Did they mention it? I'm not sure. I wasn't listening to the radio part there. I don't believe I don't think they did. Definitely mention in the chat if somebody did. I haven't heard anything about that yet, but that would be interesting to find out, that situation there. So, yeah, yeah, I'm not sure. I remember them showing the piece of tire there on the track. But, and again, I got some questions about this during the race, about the quality of the broadcast. And again, I kind of used my same rubric from the video I made last year, where you have kind of three different tiers. You have a terrible broadcast that distracts from what you're watching. You have kind of a mediocre one where it doesn't take anything away from it, but it doesn't really add anything. And you have a great broadcast where it's the, through goes Hamilton, or it's the both of them spin. It's like that iconic moment that you're going to replay back in your mind. You want to watch it again and again. That's a great broadcast. This one felt right at the middle. I didn't think this was, and that's where I said earlier, I didn't think Boyer was as distracting. I thought Mike Joy was fine. I didn't think there was, there were a couple mistakes, but I didn't think they were that big of a deal. But I did feel like I was missing a lot of the action and more of it because of the commercials. Even though I'm listening to the scanner and I got the in-car cameras and then you have access to these things, I felt like it was still challenging, and that was kind of a problem there. So, that's where I feel. I feel like this one was right in the middle. I think the race was of a better quality than the broadcast, personally. I think this was a very good race until it started becoming a crash fest. I don't know about you guys. I'm getting crash exhaustion. When they have one of these, when you have one of these races where I've got to a point now where I hate a caution that comes out with like 15, 20 laps to go to super speedway, because I just know it's going to be wreck after wreck after wreck, and somebody's going to do something really stupid, and it's going to just trash a bunch of cars for no reason, and it's going to maybe it's still going to be something exciting at the end, but it's going to be just a funereal march to that point. It's going to be ridiculous. That's the thing I hate. I mean, in this case, it was absolutely that Suarez caution. And I know he couldn't help it. I know he got tapped or whatever, and he got stuck in the grass. There's nothing he could do, but that completely screwed it up. Like, it was going to be probably a pretty decent finish, but that's always the fork in the road at that point. So, I think everything that happened to that point, I was thoroughly enjoying the race, what little we saw of it between the commercials, but everything after that was just frustrating. And not just because I picked Kyle Busch to win. I think that was part of it, but I think the other part of it was just like knowing that it was going to be a bunch of wrecks. And I hate that, because I'd like to be more excited for Stenhouse winning this than I am, because I like Brad Daugherty. I like that team. I think that team has gone through a lot since 2014, when they last won a points race at Watkins Glen, that time where Brad Daugherty's so excited he's picking Rusty Wallace off the ground in the booth. That's great for them. And I'm thoroughly happy for them. And this doesn't take anything away from the accomplishment. It just takes away from the enjoyment of it. That's the problem I'm having up there. So that's a me thing. That's not a them thing. I'm sure they're having a great party. I'm sure they're having just about as big of a party as Greg Van Alst did as well. They should. So good for them. I can't wait to hear more about it. We go down to Fontana next week. I think that's going to be really exciting. So we'll see. But that's kind of where I am with that. But no, I didn't hear anything more about the Bowman thing. I'm not seeing it from the comments there too. So yeah. Bowser Jr. XD, thank you for sending the link to your site, by the way. I'm looking forward to seeing more content on there. No margins to report, all finishes under cautions. Yes, you usually track the results there with the margins of victory there in history. But as you mentioned, yeah, all three races finishing under caution. So a different scenario in that case there. Pat Acuna, thank you for your super chat as well. Happy Daytona Day from the Jackpot Races group. Would love to see a no-nonsense finish to one of these someday, but we'll take a feel-good winner. Good to mention, Pat, and thank you again for your support in the Patreon. We do have your Jackpot Races group there on the magnet for the trip down this week, and you'll be entered in the same drawing as everyone else. I actually had to change. You'll notice at the end of the videos, I couldn't put this together quick enough for the truck grid, but in the Xfinity and Cup grid, I couldn't do the contingency decals at the end of the videos, so I basically just took the magnet one there and put the names on it from that way. And actually, it's a little more legible. I think for all that, it comes out a little better. There's just too many of you guys, so we can't do the contingency decals. But that's a good problem to have. I'm so humbled by how many people have come out, especially since 500 Days came out this past winter. to support myself and the website. In this, I had changed the caption to the site. It originally, back in 2019, was just focused on funding, additional, trips that we do to cover these races. But that was before I started the channel again, start producing more content. So now it is also a fund for buying licenses to songs and other content for other videos that come up on the channel as well. So just, full disclosure, it's all up there, of course. Those of you that are supporting in the Patreon, that's what that goes to. And it is tremendously helpful. And again, we've got some exciting content coming up here. I guess I can go down this road here on this already. I got questions about what's coming up on the channel here. I have a Field Fillers episode that I hope to get some more work done on this week. That's ready to go. I want to get that one done. It just needs the visuals done, and I hope to get that up there. Those of you who are the $5 and up levels of the Patreon, again, patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock, you'll have advanced access to that 1 week before it premieres. I have another standalone driver profile that I'm working on that Brian Hallman has sent a tremendous amount of pictures from his BRH Racing archives. I can't thank him enough for that. He did a tremendous job on what he's provided for that. So I'm very excited to get that one together. I have another episode of 500 Days that's coming together. So I want to kind of get working on that. I still have to get the script finished on that one, as I do with the driver profile one. So those are the next 3 videos that I'm working on. The other big thing that, of course, is waiting in the wings is the Derek Cope book. We've made tremendous strides on that this last month. I got the audiobook recorded. I still need to clip out the outtakes and get that ready to be uploaded. And also this week, I intend to get hold of my editor and get the manuscript over to him to get that ready to be formatted for printing. Once the book is formatted, I want to set a release date. I want to give enough time to get review copies out to people so they can review it and get some quotes there, hopefully from people in advance. I got a list of people that I used for the JD book, and I want to do that with here. So my plan is to I really do hope, and again, I don't want to set another firm release date, but I do really want to release that book this year, both in print, ebook, and audiobook. That'll be a biography of Derek Cope. So certainly, Derek being the focus of this weekend as well. We just had the anniversary of course, his Daytona 500 victory. And one thing I have for show and tell, I'll feature this a bit more here too, is my copy of the Daytona 500 Men and Machines of Speed Weeks 1990 right here that I have on hand. So I picked up this online a while back, and it's got a great chronicle of the different storylines from back then when Derek was competing for the 500 win back then, just showing how different the sport is too, and covering other events from Speed Weeks back then. So we got all that coming up. So we got a lot working on here. In the meantime, a lot of work this week, of course, was on the starting grids. I touched on this a couple times, but I'll kind of bring this full circle here. Again, big thanks to those of you in the Patreon there that requested the Xfinity grid. Just kind of a little behind the scenes on all 3 of those. That's probably going to be the only time I'm doing Trucks, Xfinity, and Cup on the same weekend, because it was very, very hard to budget my time this weekend here. I basically had, I did a lot of the collecting the driver pictures and stuff in advance. I was thinking the Xfinity grid was going to be just audio only at first, because I looked at the schedule when the schedule was posted and seeing it was only about a 4-hour turnaround, and very similar to that with Truck Series qualifying on Friday. And then to have to squeeze the Cup one in between all of that and try to get that up in time for Sunday for people to enjoy it then. That was really challenging for sure. And, on top of that, the starting grids really don't get that many hits. They even didn't when that was the only thing I made on this channel. Even when I added skits and stuff to them, that wasn't enough. But it was fun putting them together. No, but at the same time, though, it was I knew when I had the formats set up there, and you'll notice all 3 of those are actually formats based on ones that were really used by CBS back in the glory days there. Truck Series was 2008, which was also the same format I used for my first grid in 2008. So that was the 1988 format there, so 1988's format. That originally had the drivers, and they would transition to the trucks. If I had a bit more time, I would have put the truck pictures in there. Just didn't have time. I literally got that one done 30 minutes before the green flag. I think not even 30 minutes before command to start engines, like 30 minutes before the start of the race. So I was hustling to get that one in. And of course, you can only do so much in advance. But luckily, that grid came together pretty quick. I kind of do something different than I used to do, where I would always make the Photoshop file, and then it would delete the layers and change the layers and then add the new ones. This one, I just created separate files for each row, and it came together a lot quicker. So I did that. And I had the Cup Series grid. I wrote that late Thursday night, and I redrafted it Friday morning in getting ready for the Truck Series grid. So I wrote the truck grid. I think it was 1:50 in the afternoon Pacific time. I actually started working on writing the truck grid and recording it and getting it up. And then it was done by like 4:15. Like, I don't know, a little bit earlier. It was like 4 o'clock. So it was about a 2-hour, 10-minute turnaround to get that one video done, the Truck Series grid. So that was 1988. So we did the Xfinity Series grid, and that was 1993. This is the one that the group requested. And I settled on this format a little bit earlier. I didn't put the 88 grid together until maybe like around the Super Bowl. But the Xfinity grid, I got that one done a little bit earlier with the formatting. And then the formats was screwed up. The pictures weren't the same width, and I didn't want the transitions to look off because some of the pictures were going to look a little bit crooked, and you were going to kind of notice that even with the crossfade. So I was like, okay, so I just kind of did it over again, created separate files for the rows. That delayed it a bit more, which was difficult because I was juggling that with the Cup grid. But the graphics came together. I was able to get the Xfinity one done with a little bit more time. I think that was maybe about an hour and a half. I grabbed some lunch after that, and that grid was pretty much done. The 500 was close, but I didn't have car pictures. They had the grid pictures with the drivers sitting next to the cars, which I've used the last 2 years, which are good pictures. And there's a lot of creative things you can do with it. But I wanted to use the 1992 grid, which was the driver and the car picture, and they're really close together because it's in a 4:3 ratio. And I know you got some extra space on the side that's not used, but I wanted a kind of simpler style. So I did that, and I had the driver pictures and the names in there, and then I just saved those files. And I had the car pictures from practice that were available during the Xfinity race, got those rows done, and posted those graphics that night. I know that the video was released about 1 in the morning Pacific time, but I actually finished that a bit earlier. It was done about, I think it was done in the evening there after the Xfinity race, because I gave the Patreon advance access on that. I wasn't really able to give the Patreon advance access to Xfinity or trucks because it was too close. But I got that one done. So that's no reason I didn't watch the pre-race. I basically slept in a bit and kind of needed to reset a little bit. And then today was a bit more laid back. So that's why I kind of that's why I enjoyed the race a bit more, is I was just kind of unwinding a little bit from that. But it was well worth doing. I'm glad I did it. I wasn't going to do the truck grids. I didn't tell even the Patreon that. I kind of just threw that in as a surprise. And we got that up there. And that was a lot of fun to do. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. We got all 3 ones up there. I'm glad there wasn't any real spectacular mistakes I made in them. Obviously, there was a driver change with Baccarella, but there was no way I was going to have any time to change the script, re-record the clip, re-fix the graphics, and re-render everything in that time. It just wasn't going to happen. And the possibility of Lawless Alan buying a ride at the truck race came to my mind too. But people seem to enjoy them, and that's good. And I decided, again, I'm not really worried. I think they got through okay on YouTube there, but again, they have pretty limited hits, but I know there's a very specific subset of people that watch my content. I think Eric Estep's like this with his diecast races, that they want to see the starting grids, and it's like, that's why I still have them as a benefit in the grid in the Patreon. We reach certain goals, we do another grid, and in fact, we're actually pretty close to the next one. So if you want to see another one between now and Daytona next year, you got plenty of time to vote on one there. But we're not quite at that level yet, but I think probably by mid-season we may get there. So we'll see what happens. But if you're interested in that, again, patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock. So we're very close to that there as well. But in the meantime, the main focus is, of course, the coverage for Fontana this weekend. We're going to be heading out Thursday evening. We'll have the magnet on the door. Anybody who wants to join up, we'll draw your name on there, and you'll be entered in a drawing to win the magnet when we get back from the Fontana coverage. It's going to be interesting at the track there. I mean, certainly these last 3 in particular. I was covering it in 2020 when they were just starting to put the hand sanitizer machines in there with the news of what was going on overseas. I was there last year for their first race back since 2020, and they're just kind of dusting off everything, kind of getting everything back together again, and the drivers and teams adjusting not just to a track they hadn't run in a while, but also with the new car so soon after the Clash. So that was an interesting race. And now this year we have the added intrigue of it being the last race on the 2-mile oval there. And I'm still pretty sad about that. I think that track, while it maybe doesn't have the longest bit of history, it's still, again, it's something that Roger Penske intentionally designed the way it has, all the way to the sight lines on the back straightaway that you can see from the stands. And I've had the good fortune to have watched a race there as a fan. Back in 2018 was the first time Lastbro and I were there. And then I started doing the coverage there in 2020. I think it's an interesting track. It didn't put on the best races for a lot of its history. It had some decent ones at the start. It had some bad ones during the car tomorrow. I think it was just a place like Dover and some of these other tracks that just didn't work very well with it. And after having a great race there last year, Chase Elliott to an extent, but Kyle Larson and Daniel Suarez going for the lead. I'll be sad to see it go. I'll be sad to see that. I know it's exciting about them turning into a short track or whatever the plan is. I'm anticipating that maybe they'll make a more firm announcement of what those plans are during the race weekend. I'd be very surprised if they didn't. I think that's the only reason they haven't announced it to this point. Where last fall at Phoenix, they said that they confirmed it was going to be the last race of the 2-mile oval, but we haven't yet heard the final confirmation. Are they going to use that next-gen design we saw a while back, where it's going to be kind of like a half Richmond, half Martinsville thing? I don't know. But apparently the land leases have all been settled and all that's going to happen, and they're going to do it anyway. So, we're going to live it up, and that's going to be very different. That's very different for the kind of coverage I usually have. I'm used to covering races at tracks that have been there in the past and are going to be there in the future. The only thing closest to this I can think of was, I guess when we were at Mosport in 2019, right before the stuff that's happened, but it sounds like NASCAR is exploring options about racing, back out that direction again, which is great. I know our friend Rob Taylor's got to be excited about that, our host from back then. So we'll see. I don't know. I'm hoping they make an announcement during next week's race weekend. I'd be very surprised if they don't. If they don't, I think that's where you start asking some scarier questions about, what is going to happen here. I don't know, but it's going to be interesting. We'll definitely be tracking the vibe that weekend. I'd like to check out the fan zone and everything that weekend too. I'm going to kind of try to give myself more latitude here. I got more comfortable shoes this off season, which is a big thing I was shooting for because my feet were killing me at Phoenix, and I can't afford to have that at Fontana, where the distances between things are so far. I don't know if that's going to improve by whatever they put there at the track. But Fontana in the past, there's like one entrance way over in turn 4, and the media center is way over in turn 1, and that pit road is massive. I mean, you could make a track just out of that pit road, which probably I think what they're even looking at doing. So that's going to be kind of the thing to look at too. But we'll be doing coverage there for the Xfinity Series, Cup Series last place finishers, catching up with some small teams. We'll get some storylines from Daytona that are hanging out after that, and just the overall atmosphere at the track. I want to kind of keep an ear out to what's going on there at the Speedway. And we'll add that to our social media coverage at Last Car on Brock. And, of course, the website, lastcar.info, for the Last Car features there at the same time. So we'll see. That's going to be really interesting. I want to give a shout-out also to the Slap Shoes for his video on field fillers. I very much enjoyed that. I thought he handled the subject very well. I appreciate his shout-out to my channel there in my series, Rise of the Field Fillers. I really have to underestimate the popularity of that series, very much like the starting grids. There's definitely a large segment of my viewership that I know has been chomping at the bit, waiting for episode 10, and believe me, I've been waiting a long time to get it out to you guys. But I thought he handled the subject very well, even tying it in with the present day and some of the other teams that are like lower ranked in the sport and how they do sometimes succeed and how they add a bit more flavor to the garage area. A lot of the history that he brought up on that, I thought he did a very fine job with it. And, I've been happy to work with him. I really still appreciate, I'm still forever thankful for him for taking time out of, he's even busier at his day job than I am at mine. So I know his time was very much at a premium when he helped out with me doing beginning of the end and narrating those parts of the script there. I certainly don't want to leave out the internet's #1 Mark Martin fan from a story that very much involved his driver and a very important part of his career. And he did a great job on that. And I still think that's one of our most popular videos on this channel there too. Also, speaking of other people and other content creators here on YouTube, I have also received a script for another NASCAR Man video. So we got another video on NASCAR Man history coming up that you got to look forward to. I won't go into too many more details on that because that's his thing there. But I think you guys are going to very much enjoy it here very soon. I may either record that after the show tonight or sometime here this week. I want to kind of get that done. I'd like to get that done before Fontana if I can, but I've just skimmed it so far, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy it too. So that's going to be coming up here in very short term at the same time too. So for sure. I think I left off on the super chats. I don't think I got everybody's here. Oh goodness, Section 8 U.S. Marine Corps 53. Thank you so much for your super chat as well. You're my #1 NASCAR commentator. Then Bologna Burger is next. I used to watch Eric and others, but they are too worried about what they say. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your for your support there, for sure. I worry sometimes about what I say on these videos, to be honest. I keep waiting for a clip channel to start up of the random crap I say on this channel here, and then suddenly it just pops up. It's like, oh man, I said that? Why? It's like that aged like milk. But I do appreciate your support as well, and again, thank you for your service as well. But my goodness, it's wonderful being able to share these stories of the sport and the history of the sport, and also tie it into the present day. I think that's very it's very important to really tie in what's going on in the sport these days, and it requires a little bit of historical understanding. You hear this from like the Scene Vault podcast, you hear this from other channels and everything so forth. So that's definitely another part to certainly look at the same time. But yeah, I really do appreciate the super chat there, Section 8 for sure. And it's great to be able to share this with viewers here, and especially when it's a big moment like this too, where you have a guy like Ricky Stenhouse winning his first 500. I'm hoping that, I guess I have to keep one eye on the Bob Pockris page here too to make sure have we got inspection results yet? We probably haven't, but I guess we're at that point there too. Yeah, you already have that with the terrible broadcast reference. Yeah, I guess that's true. Those at the same time. Let's see here. I'm not seeing. Yeah, I don't think I'm seeing. Okay, nope. These are driver post-race interviews, post-wreck interviews. Yeah. Okay, no, I'm not seeing results from inspection quite yet. Bob Pockris tweeting this 37 minutes ago. Brad Daugherty had some eye surgery recently and was at the track earlier in the day, but he left because the light was bothering him. Oh, goodness. Oh, man. I hate that he wasn't there for that. But certainly that can be very, light sensitivity can really screw things up. So I certainly understand that too, for sure. Let's see, get another super chat here. Austin Blansett, thank you for your super chat as well. Being from Mississippi, this is a cool day for me. Oh man, I can't imagine. That's got to be, is this the first time a driver from Mississippi has won the 500? Has somebody pulled that yet? I know Lake Speed got that second place run in 85, and he was extremely beside himself from that run. I think that was really exciting for him there too. But kudos to him on that, and absolutely, a great performance for him there. But yep, Austin, I'm sure you're living it up tonight too, and thank you so much for the super chat and mentioning that as well. No Tires, Just Gas, thank you, yours as well. I was just wondering about why so many ads. There were a lot today. I also did a drinking game where it was any time a Coke ad came on, you take one. There you go. That's, again, we talked about the ad thing a little bit earlier here in the show, but yeah, again, I didn't notice it. I really didn't notice it that much early on. I think I was just really enjoying the feel of this race. I liked how competitive it was. The commercials didn't irritate me as much because some of them were kind of interesting when they played them the first time. Some good new ads for Toyota and Goodyear and a couple other brands, I think, did a solid job. The more obnoxious ones, like there's that one where this girl is doing this thing, and like every time that happened, I was writing something and I'd see that. I'm like, what the hell is going on up there? And I'm like, I'd just be beside myself. I'm like, no, like, don't stop doing that. Like, that was probably the ad I didn't enjoy. I don't even know what it was selling, and I'm not going to say it on the show because I don't want them to get any props from the, from the show here on this. So I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, that's kind of where I was on that one. Let's see. And I think I got it. I think I'm caught up. Okay, in section 8, I got yours here too. So excellent. So we're caught up on that. But yeah, no, again, thank you so much for the support on there as well. And we'll definitely do our trivia section here to kind of wrap things up. Oh gosh, we're already up to almost 2 hours here. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in here tonight. We'll wrap this up here with a few trivia questions here. For those of you late nighters out here, I guess it's down to, it's about 9 o'clock Eastern time here. But we're on the West Coast here on this. So let's get some questions here. So for those of you who may be new, Daytona, we usually have one of our biggest shows on here in terms of how many people tune in. But if you're new to this one, this is our late 90s NASCAR Trivial Pursuit doohickey here. We do some questions on this. We usually wait out the inspection results at least for a little while. We probably won't be on too much longer here, folks, but we'll wrap up with this, and we'll do some more show and tell from this booklet here as well, the 1990 book. So again, the categories, we'll have you guys go ahead and pick in the category which one you'd like. NASCAR is the first one. Hang on. Goodness. So NASCAR, pits. You think I'd have this memorized, but I don't. I couldn't even get the name of my own show right in the live stream earlier, in the Twitter stream earlier. NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. So again, think of it as Jeopardy here. Here are the categories. Once again, NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. So we'll do a couple questions here after show and tell, and that will be the show for this evening here for sure. Let's see here. So as you guys fill in, did you guys actually see the thing on the screen when it showed my webpage on here? I hope it did. Does it show it with my Twitter page? We can do this. That would be kind of cool. We can do the refresh. I think it did. Here, I'll do this. Okay, cool. I can see it on my screen. Okay. So yeah, I got Pocker. As you can see, I got Pocker's page up here. This is nice. I'm gonna have to use this more often. This is something I was hoping to use, so you can actually see like posts on Twitter or race results on here. Can you guys still hear me on this? I didn't even think to check that. Let's see, microphone's still receiving. Does it have that layer? Audio input capture. And yes, you do. Okay, good. This is still, I don't do a lot of tests on my own because whenever I set up a test, it ends up being like shown on the show here too. So yeah. Oh, I got mentioned on the Tom Grossi stream. Well, goodness. Well, wow. No, Tom's a big swinger on this. So thank you so much, Tom, for sure. I don't watch the Patcast that much, but I love what you and Urinating Tree and a lot of you guys out there do. So kudos on that for sure. Audio clear. Okay, cool. And I just switched back to this. We're gonna get this show really sophisticated. This is gonna be the show of tomorrow, the SOT. We're gonna get some more features on this. We get to the point where I can play audio clips on this. Like I was trying to struggle with that Mark Martin clip last year. I should have just made it a video. That would have made it easier. I don't know why I didn't. I felt like that was too confrontational, but you know, that's my choice. But there you go. So we'll do some show and tell here for the 1990 book here. Oh goodness, yeah. But again, thank you for the super chat, Blake Thiemann, and the heads up on that as well. And thank you as well, Sedhead 2, for your super chat. Our folks up there in Canada. This year's Speed Week seemed like the year of the small teams, with wins for Stenhouse and Greg Van Alst. I'd have to agree. Even with the repeat wins for Zane Smith and Austin Hill. I mean, of course, Zane Smith drives for Front Row, which is still, a mid to small organization in the Cup Series. By the way, under this sweatshirt, I'm still wearing the shirt the Front Row hooked us up with after the pit banner thing last year. So I wanted to fly the colors on this. I was hoping Todd Gilliland would have a good run today with the performance he had in Thursday's duel. Yeah, that would be really cool. Oh, a super chat mention. Yeah, I could see that for sure. Yeah, no, that's kind of interesting how that all turns out. But yeah, I think I'd have to agree. I think there was some good small team performances, even the drivers that didn't win. If we're talking about Rick Ware Racing having a great week with Riley Herbst and Cody Ware, if we want to talk about the Xfinity programs where it was Joe Graff Jr. and Ryan Sieg or Parker Retzlaff getting the fourth place run. And again, even if we want to talk about teams nearly making the grid, like the Josh Riam effort in the Truck Series. Unfortunately, we saw some heartbreak from a lot of these teams too, as we always do. Whether it's Mike Harmon's program or Carl Long's, hopefully we'll see him next week and going forward at Fontana and the rest of the season. These are the ones to talk about. BJ McLeod at the same time too. So yeah, not to mention Big Machine almost snagging the pole. Exactly, said Head. Yeah, I completely agree. I think this was very much a good weekend for it. I think that's why I was just enjoying it. I'm glad I did the grids for him too. It just turned out to kind of be a good time to jump into that and a good way to start the 75th anniversary of NASCAR. Obviously, I guess it really started with the Clash 2 weeks ago, but now in the points race part of the season and settling down to business and figuring out who is going to be full-time and who is just for Daytona. Be very excited to find out about that as we do the entry list storylines before heading out this week. That'll be the next project I'll be working on this week. So things get plenty busy, but no problems here too. So that'll be very exciting. Let's see here. So, I just kind of want to show you a couple pictures here from this deal here. When I get this really good, I'll have another camera over my shoulder probably, so I can just kind of show you something here instead of showing it up to the camera. But this has got some great photography in here. Check this out. One thing it does is it has a starting lineup section in it where it shows each driver. It shows most of the drivers with their cars, but most of them, and some other ones with just the cars. Here's a whole 2-page spread on AJ Foyt and his old Copenhagen Oldsmobile. We saw the throwback to this, or an earlier version. I guess it was the 86, 87 version that Chase Briscoe ran. But very nice shots of some of these cars. These are like great like autograph pictures you have in here, like 8x10s. And again, it's not just the big teams. I mean, you got Mike Alexander in here. We talked about earlier in the week. This is the first weekend we had the 84 and the 67 qualify for the Daytona 500 since 1989. And Mike here drove the 84 car at 89 and then went over to Bobby Allison's new team to run the number 12. So that was a bit of a different organization back then. Even got some of these other programs here. Here's kind of an interesting little bit of a silly season deal. You got, here's Lake Speed when he drove for the Prestone team. Actually, Mississippi themed here today. Lake Speed qualifying for the 1990 Daytona 500, an unsponsored car. Prestone comes on board, so now you got a picture of him here with a bunch of Prestone gear on, and they actually painted the car yellow for the race there. I have a full story behind that actually in the 500 book I'm writing on Cope. Butch Miller here on this side. Great shots from this. I think this also includes coverage of like the Twin 125s and the 24-hour race and so forth. So it's got kind of an interesting. Yeah, here we go. The Sunbank 24 at Daytona for the Rolex Cup, and then you got some shots of some classic old sports cars here. I'm not as well versed into the whole GTD prototype section of the garage area there, but I'm sure somebody a bit more literate here on that could certainly get that. The old TWR Castrol Jaguars in the field there. Let's see. What else we got here? What's some other good stuff? Oh, mentioning Ken Schrader coming from the back of the field there in a backup car. Here's the shot of Schrader and Dale Earnhardt in 1990. And then you got the 1990 Busch Clash there on the other side there with Jimmy Hensley driving Robbie Moroso's car on this side here. That was Hensley after winning the pole at Martinsville in 89, the weekend of Hurricane Hugo. Dale Earnhardt couldn't get to the track, so Hensley got in Earnhardt's car and qualified himself for the Clash. Didn't have a full-time Cup ride for 1990, but did have a full-time Busch ride with the Moroso team, and so got an effort there. Some money changed hands there where he was able to run one of the Cup cars there in the field. Let's see. sure we got some Days of Thunder coverage or something in here as well. There you go. There's some more Schrader here for you guys. The fastest car in Daytona that year for sure. Had a backup car, much like, again, shades of what we saw with Kyle Busch today, coming from the back of the pack. And I was fully expecting, when I was posting the live updates, I was expecting the first one to be like, oh, Kyle Busch has passed 5 cars in the first lap. Remember, like he used to do in the Xfinity series years ago? Like he would get like a technical infraction, have to start in the back, and then he would come up through the field, and they have one camera on him and one camera on the lead. Like, I may not be a Kyle Busch fan or a Cup, certainly of a Cup guy getting the field, but that was kind of cool. I mean, if you're gonna have that, you better at least have something ready for that. Oh, here's of course the man of the hour. There we go. There he is. So again, for those of you tuning in a bit later, the Derek Cope book still coming together, and we're getting that all set up, hopefully for a release this year. The audiobook recording is finished. I got to get the outtakes out of it, then it'll be finished. But then we'll take more progress here to get that done. Here's Kyle Petty with a picture of, I think, James Dean on the front of him there. The old Peak Antifreeze car there. I miss those Pontiacs still. It just really stood out. Let's see. Got... There we go. Saw mentions for Rob Moroso. Here's his 2-page deal here. I still do a double take when I see Denny Hamlin at the track, because in some ways, he just looks like him. It just throws me off. But there's another one there, too. Let's see. Does this have a picture of the shredded tire? I'm not sure. Let's see. Yeah, not really. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. Here's your Days of Thunder spread here. You got a shot of Tom Cruise walking on the grid. This looks like for the 125s, because he's got Jim Sauter in the group. I think Sauter in the Group 44 car, and there should be Ken Reagan here in the 77, the green Ford down here. That's back then. Yeah, let me bring it a little closer to the camera. See if it shows up a little better. Oh, glare is not great. See Tom Cruise kind of standing by the white car there in the back. But yeah, it was kind of an interesting deal. I think in some ways radio, I see a question here, Owl's question here. Yeah, I think radio commentary is better than TV. I think in general, but the TV commentary isn't like an outdated concept. Like I think a TV broadcast, if done better, is better than the radio broadcast, because like you don't have to paint a picture in your mind. What you're doing is you're creating a soundtrack that goes well with the visuals, which is different. So I think that's better. You'll see some old clips where they'll show like the radio and it's synced up to TV and it doesn't quite work. That's the reason, is because like TV commentary, it'll be like, as you can see, this is here, or as like a graphic will pop up and they address that. Things like that would work out. Oh, here we go. Here's a real throwback. How about the NASCAR Goodies Dash series? Back when like Stanton Barrett and like Andy Belmont and some of those guys were working their way through it. You have some 4-cylinder cars running around Daytona. You got some Celicas here, looks like. Looks like there's a Ford something there in the front. I don't know what that is. Pontiac Sunbird. Got all kinds of stuff back there. Back when back when Compact was Compact. I assume they had Toyota back then. I know I talked with somebody in the Barrett video. It hasn't come out yet, but he was telling me that he was a part of getting Toyota back into NASCAR back then. There's a whole other backstory on that, but I'm getting the details worked out. No, in this one here, it's mostly Pontiacs. Yeah, so I guess those are Pontiacs. I thought they looked like Celicas, like an old Toyota Celica, but I think that's different. But, yeah. But at any rate, we'll do some trivia questions to wrap up, and that's kind of a little look here at some of the materials here. There's a lot of good content from this actually used in the book. Had some interviews with some other principals on the team, including the folks over at Rain-X, who actually joined as a sponsor very late in Speed Weeks 1990 to sponsor Derek. So that's kind of a part of the story there at the same time. So that's another one to look at. So let's see here. So let's do some questions. Which category are we on here? The show of tomorrow. Yeah, exactly. There you go. Teams, we got 3 for teams. Okay, thank you. No tires, just gas. Also, auditions are open, or I guess I don't know if auditions is the right term. If anybody wants to be a moderator here in the chat, I don't want to just pick somebody that doesn't want to be one. I've received a couple offers since our Clash show, and so we got a couple people in here. I see Bowser Jr. We got you on there, and I believe a couple others. But yeah. Also, you'll notice on my YouTube channel, I eliminated. I noticed I was getting some comments on this, and it wasn't intentional. There was a function on YouTube. I thought it was for the chat to kind of create like a list of like rules for this. The only rule I really have is just don't be distracting in the chat. Like, you know, you get like some of those spam channels and stuff like that, or people post the same thing over and over again. As long as you don't do that, I really don't mind what you post here. Like, I'm not going to be real that stingy about it. And especially after a race like this, where emotions are kind of raw and everything. I get it. Like, you know, sometimes you need to vent that out. Fine. I mean, that's okay. I'm going to be doing the same thing, just talking into the camera. So that's going to be kind of the deal here. So, but I didn't realize it was showing up in my YouTube comment sections. Like, I mean, I don't really, you know, and there, I really don't care. Like, you know, I read all the comments. Like, I care enough, you know, I'll be reading them. But like, if you're honest opinion, I want your, you know, if I make a video and it's just garbage, or if you can't hear the audio, I want to know that. I don't need anything like, you know, I hope people haven't been holding back or anything on there too. So I took that off because I think that was becoming more distracting. I actually changed that just this afternoon. But yeah. Let's see, where was he again? Was it tracks or was it teams? I think we were at teams. Let's see here. Did I scroll past it? I think I scrolled past it. NASCAR. Let's see. KC 2 for NASCAR. 2 for NASCAR. 3 for teams. Okay, we'll do some teams ones here, and we'll wrap that up here in the show tonight. So let's see here. All right, first question. What did Jack Smith's team once use in an attempt to plug a leak in his gas tank? I think we've had this question before. What did Jack Smith's team once use in an attempt to plug a leak in his gas tank? That's our first question. Our beverage again tonight is indeed Mountain Dew Code Red. I got some Pitch Black Code Red the other day. I haven't tried it yet. I don't remember that. I think that was 2002 that came out. I think it was a little while. I think it was in college when that came out. I don't remember how it tastes, so I have to give that a try. I did try Starry since our last show on here. I think I mentioned that. I think I was asking about that during another show. I try to remember ongoing things from one show to the next, and sometimes it breaks off. But Starry was okay. It's okay. It's a little brighter than Sierra Mist, but then I realized really I don't really like lemon lime sodas that much. I'm really not that crazy about it. I usually identify like drinking 7-Up, like if you're feeling sick, like you got a stomach problem. I can't really fathom drinking it just for fun. But Starry was okay. It did taste a little bit brighter. I don't know if it just had more lemon in it than Sierra Mist. But it didn't seem like a massive difference between the two. I might have just been looking for a difference. But that was kind of it. What did Jack Smith's team once use in an attempt to plug a leak in his gas tank? Is the question. We got a lot of different guesses. Code Red, duct tape, NFL penalty flag, KFC chicken bone, potato, Flex Seal. Oh, we're all over the place. All right, here we go. What did Jack Smith's team once use in an attempt to plug a leak in his gas tank? And the answer is a bar of soap. Bar of soap is correct. I have had RC Cola, said Head. It's not bad. It's not bad. I haven't had it in a while. It's kind of like Coke without that extra little mint that makes it Coke, which I guess is what Coke, the new Coke was when they were trying to make it like Pepsi. That's my memory of it. I haven't had it in a while. There was a restaurant I went to years ago that they didn't have Coke and they only had RC. Now, see, I know some people are really picky. Last Bro is one of these people too, where it's like, is it, the is Pepsi okay question always comes up. And I love when they did that one Super Bowl ad campaign because that was brilliant. That was overdue too. They had to do that. If somebody tells me is Pepsi okay, I'll usually be like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Last Bro is not one of those people. He'll be like, no, get it Dr. Pepper. Because like, okay, Dr. Pepper is a Pepsi product. Suddenly you got to have this other body of knowledge of who does what. But yeah, I usually go for Diet Coke. That's my go-to. But that's kind of it. Bar of soap. Yeah, that was the correct answer on that, by the way. Plugging the gas tank. Bar of soap. Next question. What was the first year John Andretti drove for the King? What was the first year John Andretti drove for the King? Late, great John Andretti. It still doesn't feel right not seeing him in the press guides. Somehow, some drivers come and go, but then there's some drivers you just expect are always going to be out there. I always felt John Andretti was one of those guys. What was the first year John Andretti drove for the King? Zero Sugar Starry is really good. Okay, yeah. Well, no, that'd be worth trying just for, yeah. That'd be interesting. I have not tried that. So I guess that'll be my homework for this week. Beast of Metal, yeah, man. I understand it, man. I get it. Trying to scale back. Believe me, I've been tired of just feeling like, sucking wind, like when I'm trying to do some of these, like, things at the track and all. I feel like I get my most steps in at the track. So I'm trying to kind of fix that a bit this last month. I think it's already helping. I feel like sometimes I get, trying to fix that too. So I get the struggle, man. I've seen some people that, really make a turnaround there, but it's sometimes easier, it's always easier said than done to try to do changes like that. But as long as you're safe, that's the important thing. What was the first year John Andretti drove for the King is the question. We got answers all over the 90s, 98, 94, 95, 96. Alrighty, 2005. All right, here we go. What was the first year? What was the first year John Andretti drove for the King? The answer is 1994. 94 is the correct answer. I believe it was August of 94. And there were other drivers. Wally Dallenbach drove for the team that year because they brought the 43 back after they didn't run it for a year. Dallenbach tried to come back, and then he struggled for half the season, and then, they brought in Andretti afterwards. Alrighty. What driver replaced Ernie Irvan in Yates Texaco Haviland Ford in 1998? What driver replaced Ernie Irvan in Yates Texaco Haviland Ford in 1998? That is our next question. I think it was late 94 after you left Billy Hagan. Yeah, exactly, said Head. Yeah, I think that was it. Yeah, Billy Hagan on that. What driver replaced Ernie Irvan in Yates Texaco Haviland Ford in 1998? Seeing guesses for Kenny Irwin and Ricky Rudd. Kenny Wallace. All right, several guesses. Here we go. Answer is indeed the late Kenny Irwin Jr. Kenny Irwin Jr. A lot of you got that one. That was an easier one. Let me check Pockrass's page again here. Well, here, let's all check Pockrass's page again. Boop. 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 Uh-oh, it froze. Oh, no, I don't think it froze. Okay. Alrighty, let's find out. Do we have a news? Oh, no, we don't have news yet. 1 hour since the Brad Daugherty post. Okay, nope, not seeing anything there yet. So it's still going to be a little bit of time. Alrighty. Next question. What athlete formed a NASCAR Winston Cup team with Joe Washington in 1997? What athlete formed a NASCAR Winston Cup team with Joe Washington in 1997? Hey, Mike, there you are. Congratulations to your driver, man. You were the guy I was waiting for there. Congratulations on Stenhouse winning the 500. I know you got to be absolutely beside yourself. Well deserved. Well deserved. I know when you watch this back, you'll get more discussion on it there for sure. But suffice to say, I know you got to be absolutely ecstatic. I had Kyle Busch to win, man, but Stenhouse was too good. What athlete formed a NASCAR Winston Cup team with Joe Washington in 1997? Jack Hughes, Terry Bradshaw, Brett Favre, Julius Erving, Joe Montana, Jackie Joyner-Kersee. Alrighty, what athlete formed a NASCAR Winston Cup team with Joe Washington in 1997? The answer is indeed Julius Erving, although technically it was a Busch Series team. They planned to run in the Cup Series, but they did not, and they ran in the Busch Series. At least as far as I know, I don't think they started any Cup races. I don't think I'm wrong about that. If I am, let me know. But I believe they just ran in Busch, and somebody pointed this out. Indeed, this was referenced in 3 before February. They did found the Busch team. I think perhaps their ambition was Cup, and they went to Busch. But that was kind of the situation. Alrighty, I think we'll just do one more question here for the evening here, folks. Last question for the evening. Here we go. What car owner has a record 14 wins at North Carolina Motor Speedway? What car owner has a record 14 wins at North Carolina Motor Speedway? Alrighty, what car owner has a record 14 wins at North Carolina Motor Speedway? Last question for the evening, folks. It doesn't say what series. That's a good question, Bowser. I would assume Cup. I would assume it. Most of these questions trend Cup. It seems like if it's not Cup, they'll specify. So I would go with Cup. What car owner has a record 14 wins at North Carolina Motor Speedway? Now, again, keep in mind this is the late 90s. So we're not talking anything like, the takeoff of, Joe Gibbs Racing, was still kind of getting going back then, but, things of that nature. And plus, we're talking about a track that's not on the circuit, at least not yet, at least not coming back on the circuit yet. You're seeing a lot of guesses for Junior Johnson, Richard Petty, MC Anderson, Kang the Conqueror. All right, here we go. Last question for tonight. What car owner has a record 14 wins at North Carolina Motor Speedway? The answer is indeed Junior Johnson. A lot of you got that. Junior Johnson is indeed correct. Junior Johnson is the correct answer. So that will do it for tonight's show. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. I don't believe we have an announcement yet on Tech Inspection. That may go pretty late into the evening, I would anticipate. I will check it here through the conclusion of the show here just to make sure, but we'll wrap this up here in the meantime. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Congratulations to Ricky Stenhouse Jr., your last place finisher for tonight. Pending the results of post-race inspection will be Ty Dillon. Our next show will not be next Sunday because I will be in Fontana covering the action for both the Xfinity Series and the Cup Series during what will be the last race at Fontana. The show will likely be, I don't know if it'll be Monday night or Tuesday night next week, but we'll have details on that on the Twitter feed at Last Car on Brock, which is also where you can find updates from the track through the weekend there. And, of course, the website is lastcar.info. And the Patreon is patreon.com /LastCarOnBrock. I should remember that part of it, shouldn't I? But that'll be the rest of it for tonight. So, again, have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.